Um, okay. Hi, everybody that's joining us virtually. Just as a quick reminder, keep your just a reminder to unmute and turn on your camera, particularly when we are voting. And with that, let's call the meeting to order at 9:03 a.m. And Executive Director Ross.
Vice President Haley, members of the board, I will call roll. Dr. Kaur is not with us today. Vice President Haley,
Present.
Superintendent Horn,
Here.
Member Catanese,
Here.
Member Clark, Member Clay,
Here.
Dr. Hagerman, here. Sorry, Dr. Clay. Member Kravickas,
Here.
Member Meyerson, Dr. Robbins, not with us. Member Tovar.
Present.
Thank you. Vice President Haley, you have a quorum.
That's great. I'm going to skip my president's report or on behalf of Dr. Kaur, and we'll go directly to the superintendent's report.
Yes, I'll pass this month as well, and maybe I'll take a little extra time next month.
Okay, sounds good. With that, our executive director report, Executive Director Ross.
Vice President Haley, members of the board, this is my favorite time of the meeting where we get to introduce and hear from our state board students of the month. We have two amazing kids today. Up first is going to be Fatima Amer. She is an 11th grade student at Basis Scottsdale. She was nominated by their Director of Student Affairs, Paul Flores, and she was nominated because she advocates for underserved communities and brings awareness to social issues. She serves on the mayor's Scottsdale Mayor's Youth Council, helps design support programs to assist high school students, authored research papers and articles on public health and social determinants of health, founded her own organization to help support youth through greater civic engagement in partnership with other nonprofits, and then works for the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors to implement programs. Once again, these kids are doing more in high school than many of us do in our entire lifetimes and are amazing. And so, Fatima, would you come up and join us, please?
Good morning. I am Fatima Amer. I am a junior at Basis Scottsdale, and I have attended Basis since the 4th grade. What I love about my school is the emphasis on community and not uniformity. Throughout my time at Basis, I have found it to be a great fit for me, and I've always been surrounded by peers who had a lot of ambition the same way I do. As the president of my school's student council, I have helped plan multiple leadership activities, fundraisers for the ATF, and school-wide events. I also serve as the vice president of my school's Mona Foundation and have been an active member of my club's UNICEF chapter, and am a nationally recognized advocate for UNICEF USA. Additionally, I am an active member of the National Honor Society and National Spanish Honor Society. Outside of school, I serve on my city's Mayor's Youth Council, where I work closely with Mayor Ortega to benefit the youth in my community on topics such as greater civic and voter engagement, and previously on alternative routes to post-secondary education. I am also a teen volunteer at Honor Health and serve as the secretary of the Medical Explorers Club there. All these experiences have helped me expand the reach of my work in public health and bolstered my ability to plan projects that benefit the youth in my community. But I have had the opportunity to make the greatest impact through my nonprofit social initiative, Spark Hope. Spark Hope, which I founded 3 years ago, aims to bridge the health inequities in my community through more youth awareness. And most recently, I am spearheading a health policy initiative, Policy Pulse, which informs voters about new health policy legislation in this election cycle. Through both these initiatives, I have been recognized as a Daily Point of Light Award recipient and the youngest recipient of the Stella Carey Innovation in Health Equity Award. Today, as I reflect on my growth as a student, I can attribute much of it to my supportive teachers. The guidance and unwavering support I received from them have been instrumental in helping me overcome obstacles and challenges. As an inspiring physician, I hope to use my leadership and passion for public health to give back to my community. Today, I would like to thank the Arizona Board of Education for recognizing me. I would also like to thank my school's dean, Mr. Flores, for nominating me. And finally, I would like to thank my parents who inspire me every day. Thank you.
Go up and do a photo with the board, and then we'll do a photo with the board first, and then we'll call you all up. Okay, but you can stand up. Yeah, please, please, please. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. One, two, three. And then we'll go in.
And up next, we have Edmundo Chavez, who is a 12th grade student at Nogales High School, nominated by school counselor Martitza Leon. Edmundo is ranked #1 in the class of 2024, is an active member, president, and parliamentarian of Future Business Leaders of America, president of the Science National Honor Society, Technical Honor Society, participates in varsity track and field, and is recipient of the National Hispanic Recognition Award based on PSAT scores. So yet another person we will all be working for in a few years. So Edmundo, come on up.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Edmundo Chavez Ramirez, and I'm a senior attending Nogales High School. Although there are many things one can find loving at my high school, one of the things that makes me excited to wake up in the early mornings to go to school every day is the overall willingness to help in the atmosphere. Whether it be getting help on a simple math problem or just having someone talk to you when you need it the most, there's always someone ready to step up and help out. And that is what makes Nogales High School feel like home. Throughout my high school years, I've been inspired by my teachers and classmates who have pushed me to be a better student each and every day. My teachers have given me invaluable guidance, and thanks to them, I've become the student I am. My classmates and I have formed strong bonds through our shared experiences and challenges, especially beyond the classroom. Participating in clubs such as the Science National Honor Society and Future Business Leaders of America has allowed me to not only explore my interests, but also make many lasting memories with my friends. What has made me grow the most as a student is the willingness to step out of my comfort zone and embrace new challenges. It is easy to stick to what we know, but feel safe and familiar. But growth doesn't happen in our comfort zones. It happens when we push ourselves beyond our limits and dare to take on the unknown. For me, this is me embracing opportunities that initially seemed intimidating. Despite English not being my native language, I've overcome the language barrier each and every day. But most importantly, I've learned that growth is not a destination, but a journey. It's about embracing continual learning and self-discovery, pushing ourselves to become the best versions of ourselves, one step at a time. As I approach graduation, I am filled with gratitude for the opportunities and support I've received at Nogales High School. I am excited to carry the lessons learned and the friendships made into the next chapter of my life. I plan to attend college, hopefully Yale, where I will study mechanical engineering. Thank you and have a nice day.
Executive Director, do you have any other things to note?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, that concludes my report.
Awesome. I have to say, those students that joined us today are pretty impressive. And I think we all agree we'll be working for all the students that have been recognized by the board. So with that, we'll move to the call to the public. This is item number 2. This is the time for the public to comment on items not on today's agenda or on the consent portion of the agenda. All speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. And Executive Director Ross, have we received any requests to speak?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. We do have one person signed up in person, and then the rest will be virtual. So up first will be Sarah Jedlowski, followed by Rebecca Cross, and then Tanya Rayner.
Okay, great.
Hello. Okay. Superintendent Horn, members of the board, my name's Sarah Jedlowski. I'm here today to discuss some research that was shared by the U.S. Department of Education here in Arizona last month as it relates to Tom Horn's lawsuit against the rights of English language learners and their families. The data presented by the research indicates that the degree of segregation is the most significant predictor of the disparities in achievement between English learners, ELs, and non-English learners. In our state of Arizona, where approximately 75,000 students are classified as English learners, 85% of whom are Latino, the risk of exacerbating existing disparities is particularly concerning. Superintendent Horn's actions, including the removal of a research-based model for dual language immersion, only further contributes to this challenge. Furthermore, the research highlights a notable demographic reality in Arizona. 42% of all young students in the state are dual language learners, with a significant 70% of them speaking Spanish. This underscores the critical importance of recognizing and addressing the unique linguistic needs of this substantial portion of our student population, not removing those options entirely and replacing them with SEI. In a recent survey, it was found that a majority of Latino parents in Arizona prioritize access to bilingual education for their children's learning. Parental choice is a crucial factor that should matter for all families, irrespective of their background. This includes not only Latino families, but also Indigenous families and all families of English learner students. Superintendent Horn claims to support parental choice when it pertains to the ESA voucher program, but his lack of support for parental choice on the matter of English learners infringes upon the rights of parents to make choices that align with their educational preferences for their kids. I ask you all to consider the taxpayers whose money is going toward this frivolous lawsuit, the parents who are facing this unnecessary burden on top of taking on the most difficult role possible in a child's life, and the English learners whose worlds are being turned upside down. Thank you.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Rebecca Cross, Tanya Rayner, and then Jerry Chafee.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Rebecca Cross, and I've been an ESA parent since 2018, and this year I have 3 children in the program. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the ESA Q1 report that is attached to this. On page 20, section M, number 2, regarding the help desk, it says the average days it takes for resolution, help desk tickets were resolved in 9 days. That's not been my experience at all. I remember before we had the help desk, how great it was when it got started. And then the last administration really deprioritized the help desk, and that seems to be a continued issue. For example, I have a help desk ticket that I submitted on November 27th. It's been 90 days from today, and it's still unassigned, so it's far from resolved. This is just a simple yes, no question. The purpose of the help desk ticket is to allow us to ask a variety of questions, including getting approval for items that we want to purchase to make sure that we are not outside the guidelines of the program. Someone else I spoke to, their ticket from January 22nd is not assigned, and that's been 34 days. Another parent I spoke to said they submitted a help desk ticket in October for a change in address. They thought maybe there was something wrong with it, so they submitted another ticket in November. They finally emailed someone at ESA in December and was told it was Class Wallet's job. Class Wallet told them it was ESA's job. Parents still is being told after 4 months to submit a help desk ticket, and the child still has no curriculum since October because these tickets are not being answered and nobody's taking responsibility. The long timelines also include reimbursements. Somebody just got a reimbursement request answered from 11/19, and it was denied. At the time that they submitted, it was a universally approved item. The opinion on that changed about a month later, and now they've gone back and denied things that date back before that. So we can't even just use reimbursement as a way to gauge what is approved or not because of these timelines. I'm asking for somebody to intervene and help make the help desk priority again so that ESA students aren't getting lost in the shuffle. Thank you.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Tanya Rayner, followed by Jerry Chafee, and then Carmen Grimaldo.
Hi, my name is Tanya Reiner, and I have two children who participate in the ESA program. And they have participated in the program since 2011. And there are two issues that I would like to comment on today. The first one is regarding the Q1 report for 2003-2004 that was submitted to the board. That covers July, August, and September 2023. This report contains numerous calculation errors. There are too many to go into in this short amount of time, but I will provide you some examples. The report states that 10,409 students are enrolled in ESA as K-12 students with disabilities. That same number was reported in Q4 of the previous program year, indicating a zero change, which does not seem accurate. Then on the corresponding table, the total count for students with disabilities is 11,490, which is 1,051 more than the 10,409 stated earlier in the report. Even with adding the preschoolers with disability, 620 students, there's still a difference of 431 students. I would urge the board to request that the Department of Education review these numbers to ensure their accuracy. The other issue I would like to address is that there are numerous parents in personal contract with ADE for ESAs for students with disabilities who are struggling financially as a direct result of ADE's failure to timely process accounts payable for eligible education expenses. Not all families have disposable income. Not all parents have credit cards, and those who do are incurring interest at personal cost. This needs to be addressed. It is unacceptable for a state agency to be 30, 60, 90 days delinquent in paying vendors for parent-approved invoices through ClassWallet and vendor pay and reimbursing parents for eligible education expenses. Thank you.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Jerry Chafee, followed by Carmen Grimaldo, and then Mindy Ohm.
Morning, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity of addressing the board. My name is Jerry Chaffee. I am the founder of a dual language immersion public charter school, Title I in Sarasota, Florida. I'm here to tell you that dual language immersion is the only instructional model that closes academic achievement gaps for English learners. Our school was a community intervention to prove to our own district, who didn't even want to consider a pilot program in a district, in a Title I district school, that even though their English learners had been failing for years, and to prove that this model is transformational. In just 2 years, our students outperform our Sarasota School District third graders and Florida State graders in English language arts and math. I am asking Arizona leaders to follow the lead of Governor Abbott of Texas and Governor DeSantis of Florida, who are funding the expansion of dual language immersion programs as an ESOL intervention for English language learners. Do not limit access to this transformational program to the most vulnerable students in our public school system. Not only are they English learners, but most of them are part of other ESSA subgroup categories. Most of them are low income. Many are racial and ethnically diverse. Many have special needs. To be able to have them participate in a program that will accelerate them in such a way that not only will they learn the academic English necessary to perform well in grade level content, but they will surpass English only students, including native English speakers, because of the cognitive benefits and the engagement that is possible for families. I am begging you to allow these students that will be our future leaders to contribute their talents and be able to be part of the students that make America great again, because we're going to need them. Thank you so much.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Carmen Grimaldo, followed by Mindy Ohm, and then Natasha Lewis.
Executive Director Ross, we do not have Carmen Grimaldo or Mindy Ohm and Natasha Lewis. Neither one of them have joined us.
Thanks, Melissa. So that concludes this call to the public.
Great, thank you so much. Moving on. Moving on then to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve items 3A through 3K?
So moved.
Member Clark makes the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Dr. Hagerman makes the second. Do we have any items? Let's see. Do I have a motion to approve items 3A through 3K? All in favor? Sorry. Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, with that, it's unanimous. Sorry, I've only done this one other time, so have patience
No
with
worries.
me. With that, we'll move on to a call to the public. This is a time for the public to comment on items on today's general session. All speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. Director Ross, do we have we received any requests to speak?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. We have one request to speak for this call to the public, Sharon Lecter.
Great.
Good morning, Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, and esteemed members of the board. I'm here to follow up on the presentation that Treasury and I made to you last month related to the request and proposal for required semester class in personal finance. I have a handout that's being done now. Dr. Clay, you brought up last time that you totally were supportive of the why, and you had a question about the how. So in this particular handout, I'm showing you the number of curriculums that have already been vetted and approved by the Arizona Department of Education, many of which are free, as well as Junior Achievements Program. And I have tons of other programs. And we stand ready. I'm the chairman of the K through 12 Financial Literacy Task Force under the purview of the Treasurer's Department. Treasury and I work very closely. And as I mentioned last month, we're here to support the how. We're support the implementation. If there is funding required, I personally will find the funding for it, but I don't believe it's required because many of these curriculums also offer free training for the teachers. In addition, we have the opportunity, many of the districts already have a personal finance class that needs to be expanded to the offering. Secondly, I believe Vice President Haley, you asked me about some efficacy research studies. So attached in these handouts is a joint study by FINRA and NEFI. And just to summarize, it says, we find that financial education improves both financial knowledge and financial behavior. Further, we see financial education is very cost effective. In addition, our finance education on average improves financial knowledge and downstream financial behaviors. The interventions particularly improve financial knowledge, budgeting, and saving behavior. It is a cost-effective method of increasing financial knowledge and improving financial behaviors. So that addresses the study. So it was performed over 160,000 people. So it definitely was a very, very robust study. And then third, is that my time?
Go ahead and finish your thought, Ms. Lecter.
Thank you so much. There was a question to the treasurer's office about State Board 1058, which was sponsored by Senator Radsack, basically going through the legislature trying to require this semester class. We've done that before, but you have the authority to do that. In the statute, you've been given the authority to do that. We believe it's much more the purview of this group to require that. And so we are imploring you to help every student in Arizona be on a level playing field by learning about money and financial education so that they can face the world that they will enter upon graduation. Thank you for your time.
Great. Now we're moving on. This is like the fastest, I think, ever. We're now moving on to item number 5 for the general session. And with that, we're going to have a presentation on the ad hoc K through 3 early literacy advisory subcommittee. Do you need to do a presentation?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. No presentation, just a follow-up from last month. The board voted last month to create K3 early literacy ad hoc subcommittee. This month, you all are voting to approve the roster. In creating the roster, board staff worked with stakeholders from across the state, reached out to stakeholder groups, and as we always do with whenever we build committees and subcommittees, worked to have the best level of representation we could from rural communities, urban communities, charters, districts, and a range of roles, which you'll see on this list, everything from K3 teachers to district and charter leadership to policymakers in that space. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Are there any questions from board members? With that, do I have a motion that the board approve the roster of the State Board of Education ad hoc K through 3 early literacy advisory subcommittee?
I'll make that motion.
Dr. Hagerman makes a motion. Do I have a second?
I second.
Dr. Clay makes a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And again, just make sure that you take yourself off screen or on screen when we record votes. So again, just all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? With that, the motion carries. Okay, moving on to item 5B. This is a presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding the A through F accountability system for 2023 through 2024. Director Ross.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Each year, the board approves business rules, which set up the rules for how the A through F accountability system will work, how grades will be determined for schools, and particularly as it applies to K-8, 9-12 alternative and hybrid models. We have been efforting for quite a while to move the date of approval of business rules back with the ultimate goal of having them approved eventually prior to the year to which they apply, and getting into that cycle as a regular activity. And huge thanks to Sean Smith and his team at the department for that work. Last year, you all approved business rules 8 months earlier than ever before. This year, it's 10 months earlier than ever before that they're presented. So we're very thankful to the department for all of their work. And with us today to discuss the business rules for 23-24 is Sean Smith from the department.
There we go. Superintendent Horn, Vice President Haley, and members of the board, thanks for having me. Happy to be with you today to talk through the accountability updates. As most of you probably know, we've focused a lot these last 2 years on consistency, kind of working out the bugs. So the presentation that you'll see today, a lot of that is going to align very closely with the 5-year plan. We're not looking at any major updates. There are a few things that can have some impacts to the system, but overall we should see a generally consistent plan with what we've seen in the past. So it should look familiar to to us and to those who are using in the field. So a quick overview of the presentation for today. We'll go into the models and the changes that we're expecting. Some updates on growth. We have a small update to full academic year adjustments. We have some encouraging updates for our students with disabilities regarding their graduation status and Aspire. And then we'll look at some EL updates and then availability of the business roles. So a quick overview of the three models we have. K-8 on the left, traditional 9-12 in the middle, and alternative on the right. The only place that we're really going to see a change here is in the traditional 9-12 model. We will see growth return as part of that metric. We'd had that subgroup improvement as a 1-year kind of stopgap while we had no students yet who had taken both Aspire and ACT. So this is the first year we'll have kids who've done that, so we can calculate that growth measure. And that's a positive reintroduction. The growth metric is one of the most rigorous metrics that we have in the accountability system, and really tracks closely with the efforts that schools make with their students. Let's see. A quick overview of the changes called for in the 5-year plan. As I mentioned, they're first on the bottom, traditional 9-12 growth is coming back in terms of student growth percentile. In the K-8 model, the 5-year plan called for student growth targets to return to the K-8 model. That was kind of a similar situation. We needed 3 years of data to calculate those student growth targets. We will have that this year. That exists. We can put those numbers together and make the math work. As we reviewed with our technical advisory committees, though, that would kind of be building the plane as we fly it. So there was a lot of concerns about what would that do in terms of cut scores? Would it change? This would be our first look. Those results would come out for the first time to be able to do the math in June. And then we'd be issuing just a couple months later the first run at those grades. And so there was a lot of feeling from stakeholders and from our technical advisory committees that postponing the reintroduction of student growth targets so that we have time to bring results to the board, to the technical advisory committees, and kind of look and see what the impact of that is, would be a positive thing. So we're making a proposal today to postpone bringing student growth target in until we can kind of look through those numbers and review and see what they do. Full academic year updates. So currently, the criteria for full academic year, this is an important criteria. When we're trying to measure school quality with the A through F system, one of the things we restrain a lot of our metrics to this, definition of a full academic year. We want to see students that have been with the school long enough for that school to have an impact on them. So, we don't include in a lot of the measures students who came, a month before testing. We consider, okay, well, that's not really showing what the school did. In previous years, full academic year and proficiency were very closely, the concepts of participation and proficiency were really closely tied together. As far as if you were missing one, if you didn't test all your kids, it would ding you in proficiency. And it was a pretty direct relationship. Last year, we unhooked that. We found some things where that was affecting schools with high mobility. And so we were able to kind of uncouple those and make sure we got a fair motivator on participation as well as proficiency. Since we've done that, that allows us to make some changes to the definition of full academic year that include more students in the accountability process. So previously, since they were so closely tied together, what we had is the FAE definition was close to the end of the testing window. The idea being we wanted to make sure we gave schools as much time to get those kids tested before we started dinging their proficiency and participation, right? What would happen is we can see, for example, these 3 kids, student A didn't get tested, student B got tested, but didn't make it all the way to the end of the testing window, and student C was tested, made it all the way through. And what we would do is nothing would happen with a student who didn't get tested. We don't have a record. We'd include student C's test. He made it through all the way. But student B, even though they were there for the full academic year all the way through testing and had a valid test record, we would discard that record since they didn't make it all the way through the end of the window. We saw this in both Azella and our achievement tests. It was a bigger problem. There's about 5,000 records that got discarded from achievement tests. In perspective, out of about 1.5 million, it wasn't a big deal. Not nothing, but not huge. In Azella, it ended up being about 3% of records that kind of got tossed out because the kids didn't make it all the way through that window. And this came up in our appeals committee last year. We had a school who that had 2 seniors. It was an alternative school. They were English learners. They'd made it to proficiency. A couple weeks later, they graduated. All good things for those students. School did everything they needed to, but it ended up dinging their letter grade because those students didn't make it all the way through the window, and we tossed out their proficient scores. So that's a positive story. It's not going to be universally like every score that we keep now is going to be good. They'll just be good or bad, but we want to broaden that net and include as many valid records as we can. So the proposal would be to move, instead of the cutoff criteria being toward the end of the testing window, bring it towards the beginning of the testing window. Again, saying, have they been there long enough for the school to have an impact? If they've done that and have a valid test record, we want to include them in accountability. So yeah, please.
One quick question, John. When you say didn't make it through the end of the window, can you just define that for us? Is that the student transferred, they graduated? What does that mean specifically?
Thank you, Member Myerson. Great question. Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Exactly that. Yeah, they may have transferred to another school. Some students, they may have had a 10-day break in their enrollment, and that disqualifies them from FAE. Any outcome, an early graduate, anything that happens that those kids come off that school's records before the end of that testing window, then we would have lost their test record. We didn't lose it. We just threw it in the garbage. Which sounds bad when it's testing records. So does that answer that question?
Member Krivickas, would you like to ask your question now?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I want to expand actually on Member Myerson's question. When you say the testing window, I guess I'm confused. If they had a valid test record, how can they have a valid test record if they didn't stay through the entire testing window?
Did you want to jump in? Or great question. So thank you, Member Krivickas, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. What we could have is, let's see if I can highlight in terms of Azella where we saw it the most. So let's say we've got kiddos, they come in August, stay through the whole year. They're there, first day of testing, the school's like, gets right on it. Let's test these kiddos. We need to know the outcomes. So they're there for, let's say, and Azella, we see it complicated because that window is really long. It's like a month and a half. So somewhere in that time period, and sometimes in that group of students, we see higher mobility anyways. We had kids who moved out of state, returned to their home country, or any of those indicators prior to, the month and a half long testing window finishing. If that happens, then we would lose those records.
So Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, just this might help clarify what it refers to as the student has been with the school. The testing window is in statute. It's long. Many schools test early. And so the kiddo has been with the school, took the test, and the way that the FAE definition had been set up, the student's record wouldn't count if they weren't there through the entire test, weren't in attendance for the entire testing window, even if they took all the tests. In this case, now it makes more sense because it will keep the record of the kid who took all the tests, even if that kid leaves after the test, because the test is still a reflection of all that school taught that student. So that's where it gets a little confusing because of the testing windows in statute. There's a big window on purpose. It makes sense that schools have time to test. But in this case, we're talking about kids who were at the school, took the test, and then we don't want to discard their records because they are reflective of how that school performed. Does that help?
It does. Thank you, Sean. Can I ask a second question is, so that's basically affecting student B, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
When it says student A, what does it mean when you say affects 95% only?
Great question. So in statute, there is that penalty for schools must test 95% of their students. So we have that provision built in to where if schools don't meet that 95%, they will get dinged there. So if a school does not test a kid, it is going to affect their percent tested. in years previous, it would have affected, the dynamics got weird where it would have kind of affected both measures and done some weird stuff. So right now we do use them. Like we have our kind of starting thing. Who was with you that whole time? You've got to test them all. If you go below that, there's going to be a ding in your final letter grade. Still counts there, but it just doesn't, we can include student B now instead of discarding both B and A.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Moving right along. So for some of our students with disabilities, there's 2 updates that will come into this year's accountability. For our students with the most significant disabilities, we've had some persistent issues that we've been kind of hearing for a long time. The ACT Aspire issue is a newer one. I'll talk to that one first. So we award a bonus point for ACT Aspire participation, right? Any high school who gets 95% tested on their ACT Aspire test is eligible for bonus points. The tricky part is there is not an alternate assessment that corresponds in 9th grade to the Aspire. So there's some students who are not slated to take that ACT Aspire, and it was counting against those schools for not meeting that. What we're going to do as kind of a workaround for that is look and see if those students had a valid MSAA test in 8th grade, then we'll consider them as participating for Aspire in the sense that they tested the last time they had a test available to take. So that's a relatively easy fix that takes care of them there. The graduation concern is one that has existed for several years. And it's been tough to find a way around it. The accountability system, we use an algorithm to kind of broadly get to where we need to. And for these students, their path tends to be not algorithmic. It's not following a specific pattern. And it's not based around data that we have coming in. It's very individualized to these students' needs. And so we're referring specifically to students who have education needs that extend beyond the typical 4 years of graduation, right? Or 4 years of high school. What we were concerned about is in the system, there's a potential incentive. And I want to say this, there's a potential incentive. I don't think I've ever encountered a school who is going to try and play the game and mess with these vulnerable kids. I hope that doesn't exist, but there is a place in the system where we could set up an incentive that says, hey, it's better to get these kids out in 4 years, even if they need services beyond 4 years, because that's going to hit you on accountability. We don't want to create that incentive. It tends to be a very small slice of the pie. And what typically tends to happen is I was at a school district where we had this happen. We had a robust program to meet the needs of our medically fragile students. And we had them all housed at one school. So we had a big group of kids. And that change of just a couple students who were going over the 4 years ended up being the difference between an A and a B for that school. We don't want to create a system where bad things are happening for the school, or we're communicating to communities like, hey, this is a bad school, when they're doing the right things for kids. So what we've kind of put in the business rules to deal with that is essentially just a proactive communication saying, hey, we're aware of this. We do need to take a look at it when it happens, and kind of opening a mechanism for schools to know about it and work with us. We appreciate Director Ross and his staff and the board's cooperation on kind of handling this. We're optimistic about what this will do. In the past, on some of these issues that we know about, we've been able to do really great things during the validation period, where schools can call in and say, hey, here's this thing we're facing. Let's confirm the data. We've talked with our ESS department at the unit or at the agency. They've agreed to help us kind of review these cases and validate. And the ideal being, we reach out to these schools, we'll run calculations ahead of time, see if anybody's being affected. We'll kind of do a quick cross check against our MSAA records and see hey, do we have any of these students who are maybe they're not graduating in the 4 years? We'll reach out to schools and say, is this an issue? Let's work together and see if we're getting it right. The ESS unit will help us review these And then if necessary, if there's a school that kind of misses any of those deadlines, there's still an opening through appeals to kind of say, hey, here, we did the right thing for this student. And let's consider that for the calculation. This is the language that we're kind of putting in the business rules to put that out there. Some things to consider is these need to be students that have specifically educational goals that extend on their IEP beyond the 4 years. So our ESS unit was really clear, like we don't want to incentivize like career goals that should be handled in a different way. We don't want to say like, hey, or things that should have been done in the context of the regular 4 years. So we don't want to kind of create that moral hazard of softening expectations for the vast majority of our students with disabilities, but allowing that window for those who need them. And then the other consideration that is serious as schools are doing this is, as our ESS team reviews things through special education law, if they encounter other findings in the course of their review, they do need to act on those. So it would be similar to some of the stuff we've seen with financial implications, where if something is found during the appeals process, it would require action. But that window is open, and we're optimistic that everybody can use that in good faith, and we can get good outcomes on that.
Looks like Member Kravickas has a question.
Thank you, Vice President Haley and members. Sean, I can't thank you guys enough for the due diligence and the time and effort you guys have put into this issue. I would note that there is a bill, Senate Bill 1463, that will also address this. And I think that's still important to do in statute, because this particular issue has changed over years, depending on staff and different models that have happened over the years. And I think a clear policy in statute is still helpful. I will say my only concern / confusion with this approach, though, is that it's giving ADE ESS department kind of the judgment call, where state and federal law are very clear that any student with a disability can stay to 21 and 22 in Arizona. And so, there's some debate with that bill going on over this very issue. But I just want to throw that out there, that if the IEP team determines that a student needs to stay till they're 21 to accomplish their transition and their educational goals, I don't know how ESS can override that, because the law exists. And that's kind of the whole point of this, is to your point, schools should never have been dinged for keeping a student or designing programs that meet the needs of students when the law gives them the authority to do that.
Thank you, Member Kravickas. Superintendent Horn, members of the board, I think that is a good summary of what we're trying to accomplish here. Like, what can we do within the grounds of the statute? And I think, to echo Member Kravickas' point, we do want to be working within statutory and rulemaking provisions. And we will cooperate with the board staff and the board as well on how we kind of navigate and balance out between making sure that we address the needs of these students without letting schools or without creating a problem for the vast majority of special education students who are designed to graduate in 4 years. And obviously, as Member Kirk has pointed out, a lot of that kind of rests with the IEP team, and kind of as I mentioned earlier, that's what makes it it's not a algorithmic kind of rubber stamp process. We need to be having the conversations that Member Kravickas is mentioning, and look at the needs spelled out in the IEP and do that review.
And Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, Sean, just to emphasize, the work being done on the accountability side does not in any way undermine the authority of the IEP for that student's needs, right?
Right.
Okay.
What, to that point, Vice President Haley and members, I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at, is the law says any student with an IEP can stay through 21 in Arizona 22. There's no like only if they have certain goals, or if I mean, it's just there. So I don't understand how it's not a subjective decision. If the IEP says that they need to stay till 21, 22 for whatever reason, I think that's just it. I don't see why it's subjective. And I mean, anybody who knows me knows I have spent 25 years fighting for college and career readiness for all kids, and certainly do not want to lower expectations, but it is what it is. So I'm kind of concerned about why it would be a review process internally.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Member Kravickas. So it is not a review process of what is and or isn't allowed. If the IEP says if the goal says it's more than 4 years, then that's what would be the standard. So I think that there's just a little bit of a misunderstanding. It's not a judgment call on the part of the ESS team if the IEP has that in there. The IEP is the determinant.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to also remind everybody, as we're discussing this at the legislature too, that a student who's over 18, obviously they're an adult, they get to make that decision. And I don't know of many kids over the age of 18 that are begging to stay in high school any longer than they need to be. And if they're over 18 and don't have that authority, they have a guardian, and the guardian under state law gives the guardian the decision to make educational decisions. So to your original point, and I agree, it's a very small subset of students that we're talking about. The vast majority of kids with IEPs have disabilities that the kids are not begging to stay in high school longer. So thank you. And I do thank you a lot for the time and effort you guys have put into this and continue to talk about it.
Thank you. Any other questions around that one? Okay. A few quick updates on the deal with English learners. So as I mentioned, the FAE dates, that kind of FAE phenomenon we're going to work with in terms of Azella as well. A small adjustment to how we handle scores for recently arrived English learners in math and science. Currently, we exclude from proficiency calculations the results of recently arrived English learners in ELA. Again, the thinking being, if we're measuring school quality, is this coming in as is this record for a student who just arrived in the country to learn English a good indication of what the school is teaching? The research that we've looked at and kind of standard practice in many other states tends to align with what we do with English language arts tests, which says it's not a really solid record. The expectation still exists. Those students need to be tested. We still need to measure outcomes for those kids. It's very important. But including that in a proficiency measure doesn't hold as much validity. So the proposal today is to do the same for math and science. And we found research that kind of suggests we work with the National Center for Assessment on that as well. And I feel there's a good case for to kind of go ahead and taking those results out from math and science that tend to have a large language component as well. This is when I appreciated the insight of Margaret Dugan on Friday when we were presenting some of this concept to Guppy Mech. She asked the one important question. She's like, well, what does this do for participation? Do we have a problem? We don't want to miss those kids. So we ran some quick data just to kind of see and confirm that we have participation rates over 90% for our recently arrived English learners on the test in general. And our hope is exactly that we'd like to encourage schools to test these students rather than strategically say like, hey, I've got 5% leeway. I don't want to force this kid who just arrived to take it. We still want them to be included. If we kind of give them that step of say like, the encouragement is to test all students. We understand that this test record, is not going to be a valid representation. We're going to let that stay out. We're hoping that will encourage people to bring more students into the system and not have a strategic like, hey, we don't want this test record in our thing. Again, I don't know that any schools are really playing that game, but we're trying to find those small edges where incentives may exist. And we really, really want to bring in as many students into the accountability as possible, especially some of these small subgroups where we really need to keep an eye on.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there an incentive or an encouragement to districts that you want to measure students so that you have a comparison from year to year? Because I would imagine if you want to demonstrate growth or proficiency or look at what we have done, you want at least a baseline, even if it's not counted.
Great question, Vice President Haley. Members of the board, yes. So we retain those records and we're able to use them when we calculate growth in subsequent years. So they do count as a baseline in measures like growth and subgroup improvement. This is specifically, and I think that's a good point to make. This is talking only about the proficiency indicator where we say, as a measure of a school's proficiency, are those a good indication of what the school's doing? Probably not. But as you mentioned, in other areas, they're a real good indication of the growth that happens in that baseline and their English language learner results. So we do keep those and use them in other parts of the system, just removing them from proficiency calculations. And then the final update to our English learner indicator is that we're going to include the new relatively new Alt-ELPA assessment. So this is the alternative English language proficiency assessment. It corresponds similarly to the MSAA test that we're used to as an alternate for the achievement tests. The data for those came in last year, roughly in October, so we weren't able to include it in last year's results. But this opens some nice doors where we can, again, include a greater number of students within the accountability system and keep an eye on the outcomes that we're having for those students who have both those educational needs, both English learners and their needs for their disabilities. Any questions there? All right. Final point is on the business rules document. So again, we'll have the omnibus document. Thank you to Jessica for using the smart term of omnibus. That was not, I'm not putting smart terms in there. But that will be the comprehensive overview. We feel that's been helpful there's a lot of people who are going to be dealing with all the models at once and trying to make those a little more accessible. We will have the model specific versions as well. So those are ready to go when updates are approved. We'll go ahead and transfer those updates into each of the model specific versions for any schools that are dealing with only one or two of the models. And then this year also, we've been able to create a red line version. That's what's available in the link in the materials today. So schools can go through and see specifically marked out the things that have changed. We have the updates section as we did last year that kind of spells that out, but they can also see exactly where things have been crossed out and checked through or added. So we hope that provides an ease of use as people are kind of navigating and some transparency as far as what's being updated and changed to the system. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Any questions from the board? Dr. Clay.
Thank you, Vice President. I have a question, just a reiteration. I just want to hear it one more time, okay? In regard to the EL students, you said that you will go ahead and measure growth. The data will be used to measure growth and not proficiency. And so I want that, just reiterate that because you know that there is a trust issue when it comes to any type of assessments, right? So we have to definitely reiterate that growth is very, very important. So if we can go ahead and reiterate the positive side of this, because we need to measure growth, would you just basically focus on that so that we can erase that little adversarial feeling that schools have when anything looks negative on their part when it comes to testing?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Clay. I think that's a great suggestion. And members of the board will include that. I'll make that update to the intent section of our growth indicators. We've tried as much as possible to capture these kind of discussions and log those in the intent. So when we have future discussions, we have a record of like, hey, why are we doing these things? And as changes are being considered, we can kind of capture the thinking behind them. So I appreciate making that specific and popping it out to stand out. So we'll do that.
Any other questions? Anyone from our virtual? Okay. I guess the next item is, do I have a motion that the board approve the statewide 2023-2024 A through F accountability models and business rules for traditional K-8 and 9-12 schools, 9-12 alternative schools, and AOI schools as outlined above in the executive summary for the 2023-2024 school year?
So moved.
Dr. Hagerman, so moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Meyerson seconds. All in favor? Aye. I have, what about Superintendent Horn or Member Tovar?
Aye.
Vice President Haley, I wanted to explain my vote.
That's fine. Member Kravickas?
I will vote aye, but I'm trying to pull up the red line version. If I can work with staff to make sure that we clarify the issue that we debated, that it is not a subjective decision on how which IEPs count or whatever it is, that the issue that we talked about, I need to look through the red line version to make sure that that's taken care of.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I believe the motion passes. Executive Director Ross?
Thank you, Vice President Haley. Can we do the vote one more time? Just since we did have a question in between. And I think Chief of Staff Dugan from ADE was just speaking to the superintendent so that he could, I don't think he was able to be heard. So if we could just do the vote one more time, that would be great.
Sure. So Dr. Hagerman made the motion. Member Meyerson made the second. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And I'll vote no until I get assurance that that issue is clarified in the red line technical version.
Sounds good. Superintendent Horn?
Yes, I voted aye.
Okay. And I think Member Tovar also?
Yes, I voted aye. Sorry, my voice sounds like a frog today.
That's okay. We're glad you're here with us. Okay. So the ayes have it. Motion passes.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, just now that the vote has occurred, just one more big sort of kudo to the department. Again, Sean and his team, the business rules that they've produced since they've been in that role have always are now regularly included the formulas and sort of all of these extra steps for transparency, but also for ease of use by the field. I know we get calls from folks as soon as these are approved saying like, oh yeah, we already calculated, we used the data. So again, that's a lot of extra work from a very small team, and they just deserve a lot of recognition for that.
Thank you. Moving on to item C. This is a presentation of data from the Arizona Department of Health or School of Health Needs Assessment. And with that, Executive Director Ross.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. I'm very excited today to have a couple folks with us. I had a chance to meet with Brian Eller, who at the time was with the Arizona Department of Health Services recently, and to talk about the annual school health needs assessment and the desire to bring some of that aggregate data to the board to learn more about student health as you all make your important decisions. So with us today are Brian Eller and Ben Soon. I'll let them introduce themselves. Oh, just hit the button, right?
I think I got it.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Superintendent Horn, Vice President Haley, and members of the board. Thank you for having us here today during National Public Schools Week. We're excited to be here in front of you and to talk more about potential collaboration. So as I was mentioned earlier, my name is Brian Eller. When I was asked to do this presentation, I was working as the school liaison under Arizona Department of Health Services. Since then, I am now the division manager for community mental health, addiction, and injury prevention at the Pima County Health Department. You'll see a lot of topics integrated here. I do want to give just a quick content warning that you're going to see some information on suicide, substance use, things of that nature. So yeah, the members of the audience who need to just take care of yourselves. My colleague, you want to do a quick introduction?
Yes. So hi, thank you for having us. My name is Ben Saw, and I'm a senior epidemiologist in the Department of Health Services, and I'm overseeing the Youth Risk Behavior Survey in Arizona, and also Adverse Childhood Experiences Surveillance System.
Okay. I may need help advancing slides.
If you just say next slide.
Oh, next. Okay. Thank you. Next slide. So we just have a couple of objectives, things we want to make sure we point out today. First, sort of provide an up-to-date overview of chronic absenteeism and mental health landscape of adolescents in Arizona. Two other really important ones, I think, are discussing the key factors impacting adolescent mental health and the prevalence rates, with an emphasis on absenteeism, because that's really where it makes a lot of financial sense for our schools. And then the last one at the bottom here, highlighting the benefits of connections between local health departments and local educational agencies. Next slide, please. A couple of data sources that we want to point out that we used for our comprehensive school health needs assessment, which you'll get a link to at the end of this presentation. The National Survey of Children's Health the Arizona Youth Risk Behavior Survey. My colleague, Dr. Bensa, oversees that within the Department of Health Services. There is one additional one that I'm not sure we have a slide on. It's the Arizona Youth Survey, which is administered by the Arizona Criminal Justice Commission, and that's administered every even year across the state. Next slide, please. So some important information to kind of set the landscape of why we're here, why are we talking about health and academics and how those things connect. Well, when we look at data and information on 1 in 5 students missing 4 or more days of school due to illness or injury, when we look at the parent reported data and the youth reported data within the last 12 months and last 30 days, we do see some kind of overlap between that. We do know too that female students are nearly 20% more likely to miss 4 or more days of school due to illness or injury. So when you look at your overall absenteeism rates, chronic absenteeism starts to play a big factor in that, right? So what are some strategies that you can start to incorporate to address those kind of things? And looking at collaborations with local health departments can inform that. Next slide, please. When we look at some of the rationales behind that, it's either safety concerns or illness and injury. The students reporting data percent of missing 1 or more days of school in the last 30 days, you can see where that shot up from 47.9 to 57.9% from 2017 to 2021. Obviously, there's some reasons behind that. We'll cover a couple of those here in a little bit. Next slide, please. One of the big ones was coronavirus, right? So next slide. When we look at the impact of that, it left our classrooms empty. That emptiness of classrooms did a couple of things, especially when we look at the social integration and how important understanding that connection with folks really is, right? That face-to-face connection. Next slide, please. And a lot of that really exacerbated mental health issues, which were already impacting a lot of our students due to social media and various other things. We know that mental health was selected as one of the top public health issues by ASTHO. Next slide. And when we did a brief session with the YAC that informs this board, we went over the school health needs assessment, pulled out some key topics and asked them what they thought about the data, what they thought were the important things that we should be looking at in terms of public health impact in schools. And this is just a really large overview of some of the comments that they provided us in a survey afterwards. Mental health across the board, especially in the comments, was addressed as one of the top things to really talk about. And there's a host of other things in there that you'll have access to after this presentation. Next slide, please. So adolescence is a critical development stage with unique challenges and vulnerabilities to mental health issues. I think all of us as educators and coming from the field of education understand this and know this concept. Next slide, please. So when we look specifically at what's going on in Arizona with mental health, next slide, please. This is an overview of just from data that we pulled from YRBS. So again, YRBS is Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is administered nationally across the entire United States. And Arizona gets some unique snapshots into what's going on with kids in our state. Self-harm, 8% harmed themselves once, at least in the last year. This is a class of 30 high school students. 7 thought about attempting suicide last year. 6 had plans about attempting suicide last year. And 3 attempted suicide in the last year. Within each one of these stats, when you break it down even more, there are students that are more susceptible to these things than others, specifically female and LGBTQ plus teens. And I want to emphasize LGBTQ plus, right? So YRBS does not allow us to ask identification information on students who identify as trans. But there's really clear data that there's students that are being more highly affected by these factors than others. And then one more click here. According to hospital discharge database that we pulled from 2021, 3,508 teens were hospitalized for suicidal ideation and non-fatal suicide attempts. And these numbers definitely escalated from previous years. And again, going back to the previous factors that were cited with COVID-19 pandemic, the lack of social connection, and various other factors all contribute to this. Next slide, please. And getting deeper into poor mental health in the COVID-19 pandemic, I talked about some of those factors a minute ago. Here you can clearly see where there's some discrepancies or deviances between where male adolescents and female adolescents compare, specific to our state, and where heterosexual versus students who identify as LGBTQ plus identify within that too, and the discrepancies experienced by those risk factors there. Next slide, please. We know too that adolescents who reported poor mental health are more likely to miss school due to illness in the last 4 days or more than 4 days in the past year, right? So this is the direct connection to the chronic absenteeism piece, is that if you're working to address mental health within our schools, then you're also working on addressing absenteeism and attendance as well. When you look at the 26.1% who reported poor mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then translate that over to where in the past 12 months, you can see how those numbers really align between the good mental health and poor mental health and the absenteeism piece. Next slide, please. Some good news, though, that we want to get across here is substance use. So overall, we are seeing a decline according to AYS in substance use. That's for alcohol, e-cigarettes, marijuana concentrates, prescription pain relievers, prescription stimulants, and prescription sedatives. Right, so those numbers are declining overall, but it's really important to note too that between YRBS and AYS, our ability to collect that survey data has been a little bit more limited due to ARS 15-117, which is a survey bill, right? So if we do a better job at collecting this information through AYS and YRBS, we can get a better lens or a scope on what's actually happening within our schools and our student populations as they self-report that survey data. Next slide, please. Some quick overviews of breakdowns of substance use from AYS. So you can see that females are more likely than males to use specific substances identified in this slide. Next slide, please. Again, same thing here. Females more likely than males to use additional of these other substances in the last 30 days. This is an important factor or stat to note because 30 days indicates more habitual use versus an overall year's worth of time period of use. Next slide, please. Some of the reasons for why folks are choosing to use right now: to have fun, to get high, feel good, to deal with school stress, to deal with family stress, or feeling sad or down. So all in all, this is just translating to coping mechanisms. And coping mechanisms are something that we can definitely include and are taught within the state health standards. So there's very clear state standards within the health scope that identify where these things are addressed in coping mechanisms and just so creating overall belonging. Next slide, please. One of the important things that I wanted to talk about, just coming from that community mental health and addiction department within Pima County, is the rise in fentanyl use, right? Because of the danger of that. When we look at prescription drugs and the sources of where they come from, looking at 2022 versus 2018 and 2022, you can see how there's been some shifting in the accessibility of where these are coming from. So in 2022, the top 3 areas were home, US doctor, pharmacy, and family relatives. And this, I think, really calls for an additional component of education in collaboration with local health departments, perhaps setting up sessions for families to work together with local health departments and informing on some of the dangers of prescription drugs and working with medical providers in order to prescribe appropriately. Next slide, please. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Dr. Binsaw, to carry on the rest of the presentation for you here.
Thank you so much, Brian. So I'll be talking about adverse childhood experiences. They are frequently mentioned in the literature because they have strong association between with mental health problems and also physical health problems. So adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are the potentially traumatic events that occur from 0 to 17 years. And it covers a lot of different categories. One of the frequently mentioned one was abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. And under neglect, we have physical neglect. So not having someone who makes sure that their basic needs are met, and also emotional neglect. Household dysfunction could be living with someone who has mental illness, or seeing mothers or fathers treated violently, or experiencing parental divorce or separation. And living with someone who has been incarcerated, and living with someone who has substance abuse problems. So if you look at the parent-reported data, we have more than 50% of Arizona youth who experience at least one ACE, and 30.6% who experience 2+ ACEs. Next slide, please.
Oh, I have a question on that slide.
Chair.
Yes. Sorry, Member Clark.
It's okay. I just have a really quick question. Sorry, I wasn't sure if we should ask questions now or at the end, but I'm having trouble with the PowerPoint, so I want to ask it now. Could you tell me, out of all of the adverse child experiences, which one of those is the highest reported that's impacting our K-12 students?
Yes. So we didn't.
I think I know what it is and where I found it, but I just wanted to check, and I'm happy to share where I thought I saw it.
Sure. So the ones that were frequently reported by Arizona youth, So we didn't include that because of the time. But the frequently reported by youth is emotional abuse, which is reported by 60% of our youth. And then household mental illness was reported by 42%. And then household alcohol and drug abuse was reported by 36%. And then witnessing community violence was reported by 23% of our youth. But if you look at parent-reported data, please remember that there are slight differences and then what questions are included in both surveys. Parent divorce and separation was the most frequently reported ACE, which was reported by 32%.
Okay, great. Because I saw, that's what I was curious about, because it's at the bottom, but I saw on page, I think it was 14 of the school health needs assessment that divorce was actually the highest. It looks like it was parental separation divorce, 35.6%, which was double any of the other reported adverse child experiences, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, I believe that data was based on the parent-reported data. That's why it is really important to bring in youth-reported data too, because there are some questions that were not included in the parent-reported data, such as like emotional abuse, sexual abuse. We were able to ask that through YRBS, and then emotional abuse was experienced by almost 60%, 58%. So which was kind of like shocking to me.
Was that data that you're referencing to the only one that was on the board documents was the data that was, I guess, parental reported? I didn't see the report for the children reported data then, where you're saying it's not divorce, it's actually mental abuse, Sean?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Member Clark. So the Brian and Ben Sue, Dr. Sue, did give us a larger version of the presentation. We included the truncated version on the agenda because that's what they're presenting, but we will be sending you the larger version, which has like, I think 148 slides. So we'll be sending that to you after, which has a deeper dive into that data. And so if you have questions with that, we can obviously always follow up as well.
Yeah, I would love to follow up. And the point I'm trying to make, obviously, is when we're making statements like, oh, mental illness, emotional abuse that's self-reported by parents or by students, sorry. But then we're looking at the parent report that actually divorce is the highest adverse child experience. I'm just like so curious how we're defining like mental, emotional abuse and those types of things that students are reporting. So that was my question.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to distract you from the presentation.
No, that was a
but
really
thank
good
you.
question. Thank you for asking. So next slide, please. So this is based on the literature, which was published in 2019. Compared to those with no ACE, a person with 4 or more ACEs is 37.5 times more likely to attempt suicide and 4.7 times more likely to have depression, and then 3.7 times more likely to have anxiety. Next slide, please. And 10.2 times more likely to deal with problematic drug use, and then 6.9 times more likely to abuse alcohol, and 7.5 times more likely to become a victim of violence, and 8.1 times more likely to become a violence perpetrator. So you can see clearly there are strong association between ACEs and a lot of physical and mental problems that we are seeing here. Next slide, please. So now I would like to turn our focus to a little bit more positive aspects. So opportunities for increasing positive childhood experiences. So positive childhood experiences are based on supportive, safe, nurturing relationships that could mitigate the detrimental impacts of ACEs. Here we specifically picked the ones that could be most relevant to or might be interested in people who are working with students. So adult mentors, family resilience, supportive friends, and school connectedness and bullying. Next slide, please. Weber, we just pulled the data that are most closely related to that are available for Arizona youth. So based on the data that we are seeing, so 86% of Arizona adolescents have an adult mentor. Adolescents from lower education households and non-Hispanic others are less likely to have an adult mentor. And 72% of Arizona adolescents feel safe at school, and 38% of Arizona adolescents participate in volunteer activities, and 68% of Arizona adolescents participate in after-school activities. However, we are seeing some disparities here too. So adolescents who are male and from non-Hispanic other ethnicities and lower educational households are less likely to participate in after-school activities. Next slide, please. And 40% of Arizona adolescents have a caring adults. So this is where we also brought the youth-based survey. You see in the previous slides, about 80%, more than 80% of the parents said that their adolescent child has adult mentor, but based on the youth reported data, the youth are really saying that only 40% of them have someone who can share feelings with. So this is really why we need to look at both parent and youth reported data, and we need to ensure that we have enough data available from youth. So 44% of Arizona adolescents have a supportive friends, and 47% of Arizona adolescents feel connected to people at school. And of course, we are seeing some disparities here as well. So females and LGBTQ plus and ethnic minority adolescents are less likely to have these support systems. Next slide, please. And we did a lot of analysis, but we purposely picked the ones that are most relevant to school. So feeling close to people at school can decrease. And then again, this is also based on the Arizona Youth Risk Behavior Survey data. It can decrease poor mental health by 59%. And self-harm by 42%, and thoughts about attempting suicide by 7%. This is really promising. This is after we account for demographic information and the number of ACEs that they experienced. So it's still feeling close to people at school is a really powerful protective factor. Next slide, please. So literature-based recommendations. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of exciting movements that are happening. School nurses can also increase the resources that could be provided to students who are struggling mentally. So school nurses can help identify acute illnesses to quickly bring care to the child and stop the illness from spreading and impacting more children. And school nurses can also help identify and manage chronic illnesses, reducing time for appointments out of school. And school nurses can also prevent calls to 911, allowing students to return to class and reducing disruption. So the data that you're seeing here is from Arizona School Nurse Access Program, which was delivered in partnership with Arizona Department of Education. So this is an ongoing survey, but you can see that the school nurses really help detect the acute illnesses or chronic illnesses, and they reduce the disruption from other the parents or educators have to chime in. They really provide that resources and care if the students need them. Next slide, please. And preliminary data indicates that more than half of caregivers have to pick up their child from school at least one time due to a scheduled doctor appointment or unexpected health concern. And then 20% of caregivers spend more than 6 hours out of work seeking to address an unexpected health concern of their child. And in school with a school nurse, 50% of administrators and teachers spend less than 1 hour addressing students' health issues in the classroom. So again, the data shows that the school nurses can also help addressing those needs as well.
Clarification, the N size is 19, that was 19 administrators
Mhm.
and an N size of teachers of 32.
Mhm.
So it's a fairly small sample size.
Yeah, this is an ongoing survey, so we weren't able to get the complete data, but we will keep you posted once we get the complete data. So yeah.
I can add a little bit more context to that too. So this program was funded through the COVID-19 Epidemiological Laboratory Capacity Grant funding that was received by ADA and then passed through funded to ADE to hire school nurses specifically in rural and underserved areas where there was no school nurse access. So the data that we're capturing from this is from those nurses from that population, which is a relatively small sample size overall.
Is it possible when we get the updated that note is made that it's primarily individuals from a rural
Oh, absolutely.
community context? Because that's also helpful, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Next slide, please. So based on the literature-based recommendations, and I can share the full reports with you if you're interested in, there are two main recommendations that could be relevant to school-age children. So positive social engagement. So it would be really beneficial for adolescents to have the ongoing school policy that encourages adolescents to participate in after-school activities and volunteer work, and also citizen competency. So any policies to invest in social and emotional learning amongst adolescents will be also beneficial as well. Next slide, please. And we have a lot of resources available if you want to look at the full report or infographics related to YRBS. We have currently 4 infographics available. Those topics are identified by internal subject matter experts. We have one for mental health, disorder eating, and then vaping and cigarette smoking, and then ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences. And then I included the QR code there so you can access it anytime. Next slide, please. We also have a website on adverse childhood experiences where you can see a very in-depth data reports and also surveillance dashboards that are very interactive, and then it can highlight where the disparities are. Next slide, please. And then here are the 2 full reports on adverse childhood experiences in Arizona and positive childhood experiences in Arizona. Those are pretty similar, but we worked with Arizona State University to analyze the data and then write the report. Next slide, please. And then here are the 2 infographics related to ACEs and positive childhood experiences. Next slide, please. And then we also have one publication based on 2021 YRBS, which highlights the protective impacts of supportive relationship that can mitigate the impacts of cumulative exposure to adverse childhood experiences. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. Oh. So we have a contact information. If you like to read more or would like us to analyze other indicators related to health and wellness of Arizona youth based on the youth risk behavior survey data. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for our panelists? Member Meyerson.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both so much for the presentation. I'm curious your just opinion on this. There's been a lot of I think both media and kind of conversation around the idea of sort of sensors in schools to detect vaping, things along those lines. Just as practitioners kind of in the field, just curious your thought or opinion on that as a mitigating tool for schools in both hopefully preventing but also detecting any sort of vaping use.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I think the more data that we have, the better, right? And a on-the-ground understanding of what's actually happening in school sites is always more appropriate to have in order to measure out meaningful interventions. So I probably would need a little bit more information about what the long-term ramifications are for that. But I think like in terms of like measuring substance use, for example, like wastewater surveillance is something that would be a good strategy to implement. I know we're using that in airports and other areas as well, just to monitor overall substance use.
Another question from Superintendent Horn.
Yes, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. It was very important and obviously very disturbing. I just want to inject a minor, small note of skepticism about student surveys. I had 4 children go through this public school system, and when they were surveyed on drug use, my kids came home and told me that the kids were competing with each other to put down shocking answers. So one would say, "Oh, I said I take heroin." The other one said, "Yeah, I said I take cocaine." That's just something kids will do. So I just add that minor note of skepticism for everybody to be aware of.
Yeah, but thank you for mentioning that. That could be certainly a concern. However, we are trying to the survey is based on is a population-based survey, and we aim to have fairly large sample size. So, but if you don't have the data because of that the concern, then we wouldn't know the data that we just presented today. So I think still it's really important for us to do the survey and ask these questions to really get you understand the landscape of the mental health and then substance abuse and other health-related indicators that are really impacting our youth.
One additional comment. Thank you, Superintendent Horn. So when we get survey results from YRBS and AYS, one of the things that this equips our schools and community agencies to do is to acquire higher amounts of grant funding from SAMHSA and various other organizations that allow us to bring more resources into schools as well. So, so the concerns you have are valid. A lot of those surveys are also validated. So they'll go through and they'll look for areas where there might be erroneous entries or intentional misentries into those survey banks, and there are screening methods that we do to try to eliminate some of those questions. Thank you.
Dr. Clay, then I'll do Member Kravickas, and then Member Katniss.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I just have a comment, not a question. I really appreciate your tenacity and your collaboration, especially with rural schools. I like your approach. You have a top-down, which is what we're getting now, but you also have a bottom-up. I've heard this presentation. This is my third time listening to it. Once it was with all the superintendents and Cochise County. Another time it was just with me and you, just seeing if this is something that is needed. And I will tell you, the superintendents, the district superintendents of Cochise County, they're taking everything that you've said into consideration, and we appreciate you giving us a landscape, especially a lot of our behavioral health teams that are across the state. We're talking about this, and we're going to want to get more information from you. So what you're doing is not in vain. We need to know this information. We need to see the big landscape so that we can serve our kids better. Thank you so much.
Member Kravickas?
Hi, thank you, Vice President and members of the committee. Thank you so much. This presentation is thought-provoking and startling at times, and I can't wait to dig into it further, including the more extended version of it. I was curious, since you've disaggregated some of the data by gender and other issues, if you were able to disaggregate by students with disabilities.
So that is one issue with a lot of these surveys, is that there's not a lot of tools to allow us to actually do survey work with students with disabilities. And that is a glaring omission with us. And I would say a massive call for a need for work in this area. In the school health needs assessment, which is linked in the larger presentation file, there's multiple areas throughout that report where we call out the need for overall improved systems that support students with disabilities, because we know that when it comes to bullying, absenteeism, violence, all of those things, those students are impacted by those areas at a much higher proportion than others. So I really appreciate that call out. And I think if anything, that's another area that we'd love to potentially do some future collaboration with you all in.
Oh, thank you. And obviously, I totally agree with you. Let me ask a different question, though. The survey data that you're already collecting, it looks like you're already gathering some demographic data. Is that demographic being collected in any of these surveys? So not just a separate survey or separate questions, but is the data able to be disaggregated by students with disabilities?
Thank you. We don't actually have the potential or the ability to do that at this point in time, but that is something that we'll be trying to think about how we can incorporate as we do future iterations of YRBS. And Dr. Saw?
Yeah, so currently we don't ask we don't have a question about students or the child with a special healthcare needs, and because of the issues with information like sharing, like we want to be protective of students' data, so we is also a part of the limitation of YRBS as well. So we don't allow any adults to assist students answering any questions. So that will be something that we need to think about and work with CDC to come up with some protocols.
Oh, yeah, and I'd love to work with you on other ways to do that, even just asking if they have an IEP or a 504 plan or some things like that. But thank you very much.
Member Katniss?
First off, thank you for this presentation. It was really insightful. So I'm a classroom teacher, and so I'm thinking about this in terms of like what more we can do as teachers in the classrooms. And I guess what resources are available for schools right now? Is there professional development? Is that something that you go into schools and kind of inform all the adults that are working in the schools about some of these? I guess I was really intrigued by the opportunities for increasing positive childhood experiences. So like things that we can actually tangibly do.
Yeah, so we are working on a website that has a list of positive childhood experiences, resources that could help educators and then parents and anyone who's working with children And also, I think the first step is to really increase the awareness of ACEs as well. So adverse childhood experiences and an impact of the childhood adversity. And then also the protective role of PCs based on the literature. So we have all the data available based on our Arizona data. So Arizona parent reported data, Arizona youth reported data. So increasing awareness and and then understand like how many kids are affected by childhood adversity. That will be really helpful. And then we also are working with external partners like ACEs Consortium. They're doing a lot of community-based work and then also doing a lot of trainings as well. So if you're interested, and I would love to make a connection between you and ACEs Consortium as well.
Yeah, I think that just when reading through this, I mean, it just it's close to home with anyone that's really like in a classroom right now, because like there's so many more cases of depression. There's so many kids that are struggling with mental health. There's low confidence. There's increased drug usage. There's all these things that are very much so linked together. But I think that there's not really a playbook of how to deal with a lot of these things. And so even more so than just presenting to us, I'm really curious about how we can get the word out, I guess, to every single school in the state.
I would add into, as Dr. Suh mentioned, the ACEs Consortium offers a lot of really tangible, usable solutions and resources for schools, especially when it comes to training and upscaling and upskilling in terms of working with ACEs and increasing pieces within school systems. Depending on your jurisdiction, there's going to be access to resources like community organizations and nonprofits that can assist with providing work. I work, for example, with a nonprofit, Boys to Men Tucson, where we do mentorship dialogue circles for young masculine identified folks to try to increase those protective childhood experience factors, specifically as it relates to positive mentorship. So there's a lot of these like smaller groups that will help provide on the ground support. One of the things I would say is that we know that counseling, psychological, and social services as well is another factor that bringing that in collaboration with school systems can increase that safety net, just the same as you would with a school nurse. So when you have a school nurse, it helps to identify those things and could create pathways for referral and accessibility where there are nonprofits that are or organizations that do youth-based mental health service provisions.
No, and I appreciate all of that. And I just think that I really want to make sure that we're doing this in the school day, in the classroom and everything as well, because there's going to be kids that fall through the cracks if it's only supplemental, if it's only after school, because not every kid can do those things. And so anything that like we as teachers or, school leaders or, nurses, whoever is in front of kids in the school day can do, like we want to do. And that's why this is amazing work that you guys are doing, and I just want to applaud you for that. And anything that we can do to help increase awareness. I know this is a great body of people that can help increase awareness, but there's a lot of kids that could really use this.
Yeah, and thank you so much for mentioning that. And I would like to mention that I'm happy to present if you like me to present ACEs data based on both surveys, parent reported and youth reported data. And like we gain so much data from our communities, but what I don't want is that we just take the data and leave. But I would like to give back to the communities and then help communities understand their needs and where the support systems are. So I'm happy to do that as well.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Member Katniss, just one more reference to what you were discussing. So the Arizona Department of Education, their early childhood team does do protective factors trainings for teachers, for educators, predominantly early childhood educators, but still, a lot of those practices are in place. So I can put you in touch with some folks from there as well. And then we're excited to know that in even just having these folks on the agenda, other stakeholder groups have reached out already to have them go present to them. So where the word is kind of spreading as well. And then one last piece, you all had mentioned chronic absenteeism. I don't know that the board is aware. I do sit on the Arizona Chronic Absenteeism Council, for lack of a better term, representing the board. And then Dr. Hagerman is involved as well in the larger group. So the board does have a presence in that as well.
Do we have any other questions? I have a few questions.
I do too, but I can wait till you go.
Member Clark, go ahead.
Thank you. Again, thank you guys so much for this presentation. I just had a couple quick follow-up questions. And then one thing I would love to leave you with as an encouragement for future research. So both of you mentioned a few different times, like survey data from the students and not enough survey data from the students. And I was trying to read between the lines of the report that we were linked to with the school health needs assessment, where it talked about the law that requires parental consent. Is that what you guys are referring to, or something else? When you're saying like there's not enough student survey?
We did see a drastic decline in participation in those surveys once that law was passed.
Can you explain a little bit more what you mean about drastic decline?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but when you look at overall participation in YRBS, this last iteration was really close to not being validated because of the how many schools we had to go to try to get to participate in that survey. And I know AYS has also been affected slightly, even though they're explicitly exempted from that law. They've suffered a decline in participation from schools. What we heard from a lot of administrators is that there's a fear of administering those surveys, specifically because every student that takes that survey without that explicit consent ahead of time enables I think it's like a $500 fine or something like that per student. So yeah, that is what we're.
And the only reason I want to point it out is because there are, I don't know about any other board members, but there are folks like me who support the requirement that students shouldn't be taking a survey until they're receiving parental consent. And I saw that you guys acknowledged that too in your report. And it was about House Bill 2161. The law stipulates need for written informed parental consent before administering the survey.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to make sure I was understanding that was kind of the survey you're referring to.
Yes, it was. And I think one of the areas of the challenges for public health that we've been trying to work on is how do we help support schools in acquiring that parental consent in ways, because it's actually not too hard to do, right? It's like you just have to have a copy of the survey somewhere accessible for public members to be able to view that. And then acquiring the consent requires some materials that public health is willing to help support and acquiring and making it easier.
And so before this, the surveys were just given to the kids without the parental consent. But this is like making it so that there has to be consent, which I'm hearing you say is like decreasing the number of surveys.
I would need to go back and check on that, but my understanding is that there was parental consent required, but the way it's set up is different.
Okay.
So.
Go ahead.
Prior to 2023 YRBS, we had passive permission. We require passive, which means that if the parents, only if their parents decline, then we need to get a consent. But we informed parents about the survey and then the procedure and everything.
But now it's like they have to opt in.
Right.
And then the only other question I had before I wanted to make a comment was there is a section, and again, I'm just flagging this for people who are looking at this and consuming all the data, but then there's other people that might have a little questions or feel the need to comment on some of the data on the school health needs assessment that was attached to the board documents. It does give an example on page 22 when it's talking about the number of teen births, which it looks like has been in decline, if I can read a chart properly. But it says Arizona currently experiences teen pregnancy rates at a higher level than the national average. And then I just want to point out that it says this may be due to a number of factors, such as policy, like the state's opt-in sexual education policy or restrictions on access to reproductive health services. Can you help me understand for the report and data services, report and data on here, what do you mean by reproductive health services? Because you're saying that the teen pregnancy rate could be impacted by policy related to those. Specifically, two things are mentioned in your report.
Yeah, so in the report, there's examples later on in where other jurisdictions are doing access to service provisions and certain things, and that does have an impact on the reduction of teen pregnancies. So I'd probably want to take a little bit more time to address that question. But as stated, there are policies that have a stronger effect on declining teen birth rates.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. I think I know where you're going with that, and that's okay. So I just want to make sure that like we're all aware and we're looking at all the other source data, even though the PowerPoint wouldn't open on my computer for some reason, the original PDF did, because there is a lot of information in here that from my perspective really does seem to be, critiquing the state's opt-in sex ed policy.
Yeah, let me just comment briefly on that.
Yeah,
So we were very intentional in trying not to be critical, but just presenting what the information was and what the data was in terms of what we had. So in a scoping needs assessment, which is what that was, you are looking at various areas, including access to data, what kind of policies are in place, and where gaps may exist to improve overall health outcomes.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And the only other thing I kind of wanted to mention, which maybe it's controversial, but it shouldn't be, is that there's a lot of emphasis in this and, some really great data as it relates to K-12 and school nurses and these types of things. But there is data out there that I would really encourage you guys to look at as it relates to school choice, especially for LGBTQIA+ students and bullying and these types of things. Because I think that we're focusing so much on how we can improve student mental health, and we're talking about it only in the traditional district school sense. But I think it could be really valuable to look at, hey, are we seeing improved outcomes from specific groups of students? And I don't know how you'd gather that data, but I know the Department of Education probably would be a willing partner in that. Are we seeing, what are we seeing? I don't want to say what we would see, but what are we seeing from those students that are opting into some of these other school choice programs? And are we seeing, any better health or other outcomes? Purely anecdotally, I know in my nonprofit work, a lot of the families that come to us are coming to us looking for choices because of bullying and other mental health issues that are very deep and very severe. So it feels amazing when we can help them get out of that environment that's causing so much trauma in their lives. And it'd be neat at some point to take like an actual look at that.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, just I had a few quick questions. Looking at the slides from 12 to 18, where it was very specific information on sort of adverse behaviors. Do you all have information going back to say 10, 13 years and the impact of social media and how those particular things have increased adverse behaviors, increased anxiety, suicidal thoughts, et cetera?
Yeah, so National Survey of Children's Health and Youth Risk Behavior Survey both have a question about like the screen time, how many hours does the teen what was on the screen time, excluding the hours that they were working on the school related work. So we've seen some associations between the screen time and the mental health, poor mental health, and then mental health issues. But I would like to get back to you on that with the exact numbers and after controlling for like demographic factors to see like the relationship between
That'd be
screen
really
time
interesting.
and mental health issues. Yeah.
I know that social scientist Jonathan Haidt has a book coming out, The Anxiety Generation, that's come out. I think it came out already this month, but he talks a lot about and has looked historically over the last 13 years of when social media was really ubiquitous amongst teen and tweens, certainly a rise in anxiety and antisocial behavior. So things like suicide or suicide ideation and other issues. So just wondering. Thank you. With that, are there any other questions from board members? Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time. Thank you for sharing your work with us. I know that obviously based on the questions, there's a lot of interest in what you shared with us. So we're really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay. With that, is everybody okay if we take a 10-minute break? Okay, so we'll be back pretty much at the top of the hour. So 11. So be quick. We're just waiting for, I think, one member, and I'm assuming we have all of our members joining us virtually if you guys are all here. Awesome.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Great. I think, and then member Katniss. We have a quorum. Okay, then we are about to proceed, I think, with item 5D, a presentation and discussion regarding State Board Educator Discipline Report of 2024.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, every year, our amazing research analyst, Jessica, builds a report to put the data from educator discipline into the aggregate, look at trends, and make the data sort of more actionable by our amazing investigative unit and enforcement action teams who do incredible work for us keeping kiddos safe. She'll be presenting on that today. I just want to, and Jessica will say this several times as well, but I just want to open the presentation by saying less than 1% of Arizona educators ever encounter educator discipline issues. And while you will see graphs and charts that show increase in the number of cases, that is not due to an uptick in activity from teachers, but from having more investigators than we have had in the past and streamlining our processes so that cases move more quickly. So go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Executive Director Ross, Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board. Like Executive Director Ross said, this report is to really represent the work of the investigative unit, the enforcement action staff through Garnet Burns leadership, the professional practices advisory committees, of which there are 3 now that meet, so often, but every month, sometimes twice a month. And then also the work that you're doing to review these cases when they come before you and to make the decision ultimately on them. Next slide, please. So we release this report at the beginning of every new calendar year. So each information is reflecting the January through December and incorporating those cases that have been acted by the board. So this does not represent cases that are currently sitting with the investigative unit and being heard by the PPAC. It's only those decisions that have come before you. And as we said, our focus has really moved in the past couple of years towards being a preventative force. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. Next slide. As Executive Director Ross said, it is less than 0.5% of all valid certificated educators that have been disciplined by the board. As though non-certificated persons have come under the purview, we're working on the mechanism to accurately measure what the incidence of discipline would be for those people who are working in schools, but not necessarily being the teacher of record. So as you can see, those cases are 272 that were decided on by the board in calendar year 2023. This is a sharp increase, and that estimate there line is kind of low at 250. I imagine it's going to be a little bit higher in the next year. Next slide. This data on the right is only for calendar year 2023, whereas a lot of the information in the full report included on the item is reflective of all of those cases from 2012 to 2023. What we can see here in this year is that the source of reports that came from school officials, whether it be district or charter HR professionals or the administrator of the school themselves, increased in 2023. Whereas some of those Department of Public Safety, FCC suspension notices, it has been going down in recent years. I would say this is really reflective of the work of Garnet Burns and Chief Investigator Spalich to go out to school sites, to go to conferences and really introduce the process of making a complaint before the investigative unit and really supporting them in what really elevates to an educator misconduct case. Next slide. This is a really simple demographic. We don't have a lot of demographic information currently available, but we are working on getting more of that, whether that be the age of the educator or a non-certificated person, or the years of experience that they might have specific to subject areas and grade levels. So we know that educators in the field are 3/4 female and 1/4 male. However, the enforcement actions involve school personnel that is primarily male at around 65% over the years. Next slide. The certificate type, this is kind of busy and changing as there's more certificate types that are kind of, we're disaggregating it by, because we have now those non-certificated educators represented on here. In 2023, 9% of the cases were from non-certificated persons that worked in a public school, 4% in a charter school, and 1% in a private school. And so I want to really highlight that information because it is new to the report this year and new information that we can begin to explore at your guidance. We still continue to see very similar trends of secondary and substitute educators being some of those certificated roles that are more often disciplined by the board compared to some others like elementary or special education. In the report, there's a little information about the category of the misconduct by the certificate type, and so that can be some more information to explain what's happening behind the scenes. So next slide. This has been information that has been a little bit challenging to gather and collect in an accurate way. Over the years, we've really worked with the certification unit to try to represent this information in a way that is reflective of how they are processing applications. So we gather this from what is entered when they are applying for their certification. And so just based on 2022 and 2023, 35% of those educators were a graduate of an educator preparation program, a teacher preparation program, or they have a major in an education area like special education or English education. And regardless of preparation, I want to highlight that 40% of all teacher misconduct is occurring from somebody who has completed their education out of state and they've moved to Arizona to teach. Next slide. The category of misconduct, and again, this is not necessarily reflective of an incidence of more misconduct happening in any of these areas over the years. It's just the efficiency of the investigative unit and enforcement action team to process cases. We do see that sexual misconduct cases come before the board for action. Later on, you'll see that the type of disciplinary action that the board takes very often is surrenders, and a lot of these sexual misconduct cases happen to be surrenders. And so those are really being pushed through the investigative process a little bit faster, and those cases are being adjudicated. Then next slide. This is some new information that we've started gathering. It's important to note that the systems might not be fully up to date or comprehensive, and this is just what their most recent employment was. We try to fill in from the case file where they may have been working if it is a discrepancy from what is shown in the teacher input application or the school and district employee record. And we use that case file information to say if this person was reported by XYZ charter or district, that would supersede whatever is in the system. And in the future, we will then compare that to the educators are actually working in each of these counties as well to see if any of these are represented. Obviously, Maricopa and Pima counties are going to be higher because we have more teachers working in those counties. So we definitely want to disaggregate that and look at the incidents in the future. Next slide. The type of disciplinary action. This is the action that you have taken as a board, consistent with statute and board rule under your purview. You can see that those surrenders are very high at 42%. Compared to previous years. It's just I would really want Garnett Burns to speak a little bit more to why that trend is there. And I don't know if she would love to or just sit back a little bit. But if you have any questions, I'm sure we'd be happy to answer some of those. Also not noted here is that negotiated settlement agreements represented 16% of the cases adjudicated by the board. A lot of these cases have to be represented by outside counsel or an assistant attorney general through a disciplinary hearing or review process, including those negotiated settlement agreements. Next slide. And then finally, these are some of the preventive measures that are currently in place and are currently being expanded. And we really lean on you of what your priorities might be in some of these and what direction you would like us to take in the future. First is to continue training school HR professionals and administrators on the importance of their duty to report. The second is at your whim to explore the requirements, not whim, but based on the data, explore requirements for individuals attaining certain certificates to participate in some mandatory ethics or professional practices training. A lot of that is associated with that higher incidence of substitute teachers being disciplined more than teachers who might have a certificate in a specific grade level or subject area. Then currently, I'm sure Rico Yanes will talk about this when he gets to the legislative updates. Proposed legislative changes for reciprocal disciplinary action for out-of-state educators who have not yet sought teaching certification or employment in an Arizona district or charter school. This is to address some of those gaps where a teacher has been disciplined in another state by another board or review body, and currently there's no process for us to prevent that person before they've gotten into an Arizona school to be able to work in that Arizona school. And one of the things that we continue to work on and develop is within the educator preparation programs, how we can message and create consistent training within their curriculum. Next slide. So there are a few areas that I already included on demographics where we would like to collect and expand information, and that is educators' age, years of experience. We have wanted to look at in classroom versus out of classroom behavior because you might see sexual misconduct. How often is that involving a student within the classroom, or is it a family member? Both are really reprehensible behaviors, but they carry different review by the bodies. There's also compliance with the negotiated settlement agreements, and that's been something that recently the enforcement action team has been measuring and bringing some of those violations before you in 2023. The last thing is just expanding the data on non-certificated persons. And then finally, we have the county superintendents, and we have shared some of the reports and information with them in previous meetings. And this can continue to be expanded as we have more access to some data, and more point-in-time data is what we've been focusing on too. So every month we do update a database for each county superintendent that includes those educators that have been disciplined by the board that month, so that information can get before them, and they can just make sure that none of them are working or possibly seeking any employment in any of their schools. Another thing that our project director of constituent services has worked with the enforcement action team on is to create a resources page for educators on tools to prevent misconduct and what misconduct might look like. Some of those trainings, some of them are paid. There are some free resources as well. And then the potential is there to expand it to specific Arizona issues in the future. So what are some of the cases that have been seen before the board, and what has been the action, and what steps could have been taken for that to not occur? And then finally, we have that bill number on what has been introduced for those non-certificated persons and the reciprocal discipline. Any questions?
Any questions from members of the board? Dr. Hagerman.
Just as a former PPAC member, I want to thank you for the report, and also just looking at the data, just knowing that 3 teams are going and sometimes twice a month. You're absolutely right. That is a lot more. Because we would get cases that had been around for a while before they got to us. And so being able to have that immediacy of bringing the cases forward and not letting them sit, I really appreciate. So thank you.
Absolutely. There has been efforts in the past to possibly measure the case processing time, but we've more used that internally to evaluate where there are any lags in getting cases before the board.
I see we have a question from Superintendent Horn.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. It was very timely for me because there was an article in the Arizona Independent this morning reporting the numbers in the report and being very critical of us and the education system as a whole. Now, and I know some of the important clarifications, such as that the numbers went up because we worked through a backlog because we have more people from the Attorney General's office. One of the things that they harped on was the number of sexual cases, and the fact that many of those cases they they surrender their certificate, so it moves through the system faster, was good information. For those that don't surrender their certificates, are they mostly, do they end up losing their license to teach?
Thank you, Superintendent Horn, Vice President Haley, and members. That is a fantastic question. I really appreciate you bringing some of that media reporting to our attention. On that question, they go through the Professional Practices Advisory Committee most often, those Category 1 cases, and they typically are pursuing 3-4 years suspension or that revocation, most typically the revocation. And I can provide some more information about exactly the distribution of actions that are taken on those Category 1 cases for you.
So would I correctly understand that if it involves touching, it would be a revocation, and if it's a 3 or 4 year suspension, that might be something like looking at pornography or something like that?
Yes, definitely. There is a discipline matrix that the Professional Practices Advisory Committee uses, and they are comparing that. And that was all really developed based on what would be best for the students and best for the schools and previous cases and what has been the action. They are often given an extra condition to attend specific training about some of those issues so that that doesn't happen again. And there's full cooperation a lot of the time with law enforcement in order to, sometimes we'll do a summary suspension. Those are those R72-1309 cases that you see. And that immediately would make it so that the educator can't work in the school while they're still under investigation for some type of sexual offense.
And then looking for patterns in the type of teacher, I noticed that 16% of substitute teachers, or 16% of the cases were substitutes. How does that, do you know how that compares with the percentage of people in the classroom who are substitutes?
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Horn. We did not have that information come from a data request in time for this meeting. We have looked at it in 2021, and then in a future release of the report in the coming months, we're going to provide that in a public release, as well as to the board members, and putting that on our website to have some of that information of is this happening more often for those substitutes. In the past, in 2021, it was. In addition for those subject matter experts as well. And that's where we really identified that maybe there's some certification requirements necessary to provide some of that ethics and professional practices training for them.
So do you know from prior years, typically what percentage of our teachers were substitutes?
Sorry, Superintendent Horn, Vice President Haley, members, I don't have the exact number in front of me because I only have the 2023 report, but I can get that information to you. And it'll be included in the 2023 on the second release of it, the extra information available.
Okay. Any observations by you of any classifications where certain classification were higher in the percentage of complaints than their percentage in the population of teachers?
No, I wouldn't say so, Superintendent Horn. It's really been those that haven't gone through maybe an educator preparation program or some other curricula that would have prepared them for working in a classroom or, some ethics training.
Okay, thank you for answering my questions. It's going to help me in my radio interview tomorrow. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions from members of the board?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, I just want to emphasize a couple of things. That page, there's a link in Jessica's slide deck, is live. And so we do have the trainings that our Enforcement Action Director, Garnett Burns, and our Chief, Dave Spelich, offer. And then we have other trainings that we have worked with partners like Department of Child Safety, other groups who produce these kinds of trainings to help teachers avoid issues in the classroom, for a range from like healthy social media habits to more serious issues. So that is a big initiative for us because we would like to prevent those issues from ever occurring. And then, as Jessica mentioned, Rico is going to talk about a bill that the board put forward this year for reciprocal discipline that will allow the board greater authority to disallow educators who have committed serious crimes from ever even getting into the classroom. So a lot of great work by the investigative unit and by the enforcement actions team. It really is a staggering amount of work, and they're incredibly dedicated. And And just to speak to Superintendent Horn, I want to emphasize for anybody who's listening in the public, the board prioritizes any crimes involving of a sexual nature. So those immediately go to the first, to the top of the list for investigation, just so folks know those are never backlogged.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We really appreciate your report. And with that, I think we're moving on to
I'm sorry.
item.
Vice President Haley, it looks like Member Kravickas has a question.
Sorry, Member Kravickas.
Oh, thank you, Vice President. I just wanted to really, really thank all the staff who put in amazing amounts of hours and all of the volunteers on all our committees that put in all these hours to help keep our kids safe.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, with that, we'll be moving on to item 5E. This is presentation and discussion on personal finance education and academic standards for high school. Executive Director Ross.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, I'm actually going to hand this off to our Director of Policy, Rico Yanez.
Hi, good morning, Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. I am going to provide an update on the personal finance education requirements as presented at the January 22nd meeting by the Treasurer's Office and their Financial Literacy Task Force. And we also have another update right now on some legislation moving through, sponsored by Senator Mesnard on personal finance standards for graduation. It is Senate Bill 1058, which is included in our board materials for this meeting, and it directs the board to include a 1 semester personal finance requirement for graduation. As of right now, the bill language would take effect for the graduating class of 2028. It specifies that these standards are embedded in social studies and prescribes a set of standards for inclusion when the board goes to open standards revisions. There has been a lot of stakeholder work on this legislation, and Senator Mesnard has been committed to fostering a collaborative environment to hear all feedback and really created an open space for that. So we're thankful for that. And he is very committed. He's very passionate about the inclusion of a half credit for personal finance, which he submitted a letter for board member review, which is also included in the materials. And he's been very amenable to working around some of the other language on this bill. So I think that we're confident in being able to move the rollback or the rollout for this legislation from that class of 2028, which would be the incoming freshmen for this after the summer, to 2030 to allow the board to open a comprehensive revisions process and then give proper time for LEAs to be able to roll out this program or this graduation requirement. And we have also been able to remove it from the social studies standards. The board had most recently adopted social studies standards back in 2018. COVID slowed the rollout a little bit, and full implementation is only a couple years in. So we were able to move it into its own standalone area should we open revisions for this if it were to pass. So that's helpful. It provides flexibility for the field in how they allocate the requirement, and it also provides flexibility for the board in developing these standards without touching on all of the great work that the Department of Education has just wrapped up for social studies. We also have a possible either removal of the endorsement along with it could be also a clarification that it's optional. And then we also have in session law rather than in the actual legislation, a removal of the prescribed set of standards to just a inclusion of the board process for standards revisions. So that opens up the standard revisions process to go through stakeholder feedback, public review for a 45-day window where the department responds line for line to all public requests on and recommendations for the standards, and allows for that greater sort of public input without the prescribed standards being set in statute. And then moving forward, there's also a document that I included, which is just a standards one pager that was actually drafted by the Department of Education standards team, which is Really great work on their part to put this out in a way that is informative and condensed in a form that provides us with a lot of context and what that standards revisions process looks like. It includes a 4 to 8 week notification period where we solicit public feedback and applications for stakeholders and for parents, working groups, content experts to be able to apply to convene to develop some of these standards. And then there is also another, as I mentioned before, once they draft the standards and present to the board, there's a 45-day public window where anyone may submit recommendations to the department and to the board, and the department will respond line for line on those recommendations. I would like to open up the floor now for any questions that members have about this legislation as it moves through.
Dr. Hagerman.
Rico, thank you so much. You said there's an input process, because I do think getting input from parents and students are going to be super important. Just to tell my district's kind of experience, we're revamping our personal finance class, and the work that our teacher and AP are doing is really moving the class from 1 section to 3. So there's a lot of interest in a vibrant personal finance class. I think the issue is going to be around the requirements and students navigating the classes they want to take. So we've been pushing for college-bound students to consider CTE as a CTE completer. And then we also have kids that take up to 6 classes in science, but want to take art and music, or even my daughter going in the criminal justice wanted to take AP Gov and AP Psych. So she had to take econ during the summertime. So just the logistics of navigating kids who have a path that they're going to for college and career, how to fit this in, just to get a lot of input with parents and students to figure out how to navigate that in a thoughtful way that doesn't come at the cost of the things that they're focused on. That would be my only thing, that as often as you could say, think about like, what is like a kid who's a really STEAM oriented kid, a kid who's engineering and doing this, how does this affect their plan going forward? Thank you.
Yes, of course. And that is exactly what, as I was laying out, that is what that public comment process is for. And that is why historically and in continuity through board approved process, we will continue to ensure that we have that robust public feedback, because we want to make sure that when this becomes a requirement, that this is something that is implementable for our local education agencies, that this is something that will be open for their feedback, because we want to be the sounding board for what concerns stakeholders will have across the state. And that is why, that is what our voice is for in this process, as the department opens and revises those standards. That's why we have periodic updates from them, to continue to give them direction, feedback, ask questions about the process, and ensure that we are disseminating the information so that the public can come to these meetings at the board if they want to speak here, go to the department revisions process and submit those public comments there, where they'll get direct response from the department, and continue to make sure that we're hearing that input as the process is underway.
Member Catanese.
Thank you, Vice President Haley. Rika, thank you so much for this. Question for you, and I might just be missing it. Will there have to be a recertification, or what teachers would be able to teach this? Like, is there something specific that someone would have to go through in order to teach this? I just want to know, how easy will this be for schools to implement?
Yes, so that is something that the board will be working on. Should this legislation pass, we need to have conversations about what needs to be done for ensuring that we have teachers that can teach this course. As of right now, in statute, what the bill is requiring, or was a voluntary personal finance endorsement. There have been discussions to either provide clarifying language that even for those teachers who will be teaching personal finance, that endorsement is optional, or removed from the statute. And that would leave those discussions to the board and to the recruitment and retention team at the Department of Ed to ensure that we have teachers that are trained for this, but also in a way that is not as burdensome for the field.
And I guess my other, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Vice President Haley, members of the board, Member Katniss, that is one of the ongoing discussions many stakeholders are having with Senator Mesnard, is the idea of removing the language where it's bound to social studies. So that way schools and districts would determine who could teach the course without any extra needed certification, especially because there's not funding attached to it. So yeah, that was a concern brought forward by stakeholders, board included, and is, it's, you can't say for sure until you see the language on the floor, but has been addressed in those stakeholder meetings.
No, that's wonderful. Just because, I mean, we don't want to make things more difficult for teachers as they already are experiencing. And then I guess my other question is what are the stakeholders that will be involved in kind of deciding what's being taught in this course? Because I think that when you say personal finance, that could be a lot of things.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Member Katniss, the board has an approved process for standards creation, review, and revision. As Rico detailed, part of that process is the board would open standards in a public meetings. There's one place for input. The department convenes educators and experts from across the state to come in and work on creating those standards. They first study research, what other states have done, kind of build a common knowledge base. Then they would spend, honestly, upwards to 18 months developing those new standards. And then they would bring those to the board periodically for public feedback from the board, from the public. And then eventually, when they feel they have a draft ready, it would go forward for at least 45 days of public review, go back and then for more revision. And then there's a spot where the department has a technical expertise check. So they get state and national experts to review the draft. So there are a number of places where there is input on what goes into the standards themselves. It is largely driven by Arizona educators.
Dr. Clay.
Thank you, Vice President Haley. I have a question. It's a clarification, just for clarification. The clarification is, if this passes, the board will be responsible for the plan. Is that correct? And when I'm talking plan, I'm not just talking about the curriculum. I'm talking about what's going to be taken away so that this can happen. I still see a takeaway. I again, let me be clear, I do support this, but something's going to have to be pulled. Okay, if you're talking about graduation requirements, right? Something is going to have to be pulled. Who's responsible for that decision? Is that the board? Is that the Board of Regents? I mean, who is going to make those decisions, or is that part of the process of this board plan?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Dr. Clay, that language is actually included in the bill. So if the bill passes, the half credit would come from the 7 elective credits that a student is required to take during graduation. So the board would not have authority in that space. It would be part of the legislation. So the part of the stakeholder feedback being given to Senator Mesnard as part of that process is discussions about having courses like a personal finance course as a 4th credit math class, a CTE kid who's in business or finance, those classes automatically also counting already, so the kid doesn't have to sort of take it again. Those decisions have not been made, but that is on the table as part of the discussions, but it would not be under the board's purview. The bill itself says the half credit would come from the elective. So the bill would set the law.
So just to clarify, well, it looks like instead of students having 7 electives, they will only have 6.
6.5.
Okay, thank you.
Member Tovar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question in regards to the purview of our board. I know we talked a little bit about what this legislation, if passed, would do. My question would be in regards to, we know that, this is a bill this session in regards that's tackling an issue that's usually typically under the purview of our jurisdiction. So for me, my question would be, have have any of the stakeholders spoken with Senator Mesnard in regards to this taking place? And, in your view, does it set a precedent in regards to future sessions where we can get inundated by different bills that would go and try and supersede our authority here at the board?
Member Tovar, to answer your question, frankly speaking, the graduation requirement bills are a topic that comes up relatively frequently at the legislature. Or so I've heard. I have not been around too long, but that is what I have heard from other stakeholders, that there are oftentimes instruction bills that move through the process. Graduation bills come around every year. I think the precedent in introducing these bills has already been set, but I think that this bill runs a little bit different in that there has been national conversation around this. In recent times, there have been a lot of states that have moved towards adopting the requirement for personal finance, which is why we have decided to inform board members of this as it moves through, in contrast where we have not brought these bills as often to board member updates. And then would you be able to offer your second question again by chance?
During the stakeholder process, have stakeholders brought this to the attention of Senator Mesnard?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Member Tovar, yes. So stakeholders have been involved in discussions with Senator Mesnard from the start. The board staff under the purview or under the orders of the legislative committee actually did approach Senator Mesnard relatively early, and we did make the offer, since graduation requirements live with the board. It's the board's charge and purview that the board would take on this work. And moving forward, you heard Treasurer Yee and speak to that last month, and one of the speakers in Call to the Public that today even mentioned that. So that offer was made, and as the board, and speaking to the legislative committee, definitely there's concern about a precedent of graduation requirements being legislated, especially because the board is the authority in this space and has the connection to stakeholders to gather that input, to make sure to make bills, as implementable or standards or courses as implementable as possible. However, while the preference would always be for those things to live with the board, again, the sponsor of this bill has been very, very amenable to working with board staff and other stakeholders to shape the bill into a form that would be best implementable for schools. So yes, it is something that concerns board staff, and we do bring that up to sponsors. It's something that concerns stakeholders. They do bring it up to sponsors. In this particular case, again, the sponsor has been very, very collaborative.
Thank you. Thank you for that update. I mean, I've worked in the past when I was in the legislature with Senator Mesnard. He's a great guy. I mean, always has great intentions in regards to wanting to do best. And let me reiterate, I mean, I am supportive of this bill. I would be even more supportive if we were garnered or districts were garnered the leeway in regards to how that half a credit is utilized, where it could be implemented in other classes that a student is currently taking. As a fellow member just mentioned, and just in regards, something is going to have to give, as Dr. Clay stated. So we want to make it as feasible as possible for students to be able to stay on track in regards to the requirements, but at the same time offer them that flexibility for the students' needs as well. My last question would be just in regards to, you said there was no fiscal money attached to this bill. Could you just walk me through, was there at one point any mention of it? Were there stakeholders that that were in support of it? I mean, essentially, we're talking about a financial literacy, bill, which I know for many districts across Arizona, depending on, what whatever shapes out, there might be some districts, especially in our rural areas, that need some support in regards to either upskilling in, educator into teaching this class. So I just want to make sure that subject has been broached.
Hello, Member Tovar. So that subject is of ongoing discussion on staffing, what those costs look like at the local education agency level, because there could be a cost there in terms of needing to hire on more staff. At the board level, every time that the board adopts an additional graduation requirement, as we would for a half credit of personal finance, we have to submit a fiscal impact statement. So that will include what the cost may be for capital costs. But as of right now, on the board side for that fiscal impact statement, that work is not ongoing at the moment, but those discussions are being had about the cost to schools.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Madam Chair, no further questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any other questions from board members? Seeing no other questions, thank you so much, Rico, for your presentation, for your thoroughness on understanding the policy and the work that both you and Executive Director Ross have done on behalf of the board and educating Senator Mesnar and other related members. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Making progress. We are now, I think, at item 5F, and this is a presentation and discussion regarding legislative affairs. The board may take action to support or oppose or remain neutral on specific legislative proposals. Executive Director Ross.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Each meeting during the legislative session, the last item in the general session is a legislative update, which Rico will be delivering in a moment. Just as a reminder, during these legislative updates, the board does have the authority to choose, if it wants, to vote to oppose or support specific bills. So just that it doesn't happen often, but it is built into the process. So just as a reminder. Rico.
Hello, Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. I will briefly provide a legislative update on some of the bills that the board is tracking. I won't touch on everything that is included in the document that I included, but I would offer that if anyone would like to pull any of those bills out for further discussion, that they may do so. I would love to answer questions on any of them. First off, I wanted to touch on SB 1560, which is the bill that Jessica discussed coming from our investigative unit. This was legislation that the board had originally intended to move through last year, but with staff turnover, it just was not a realistic option to move that forward at the time. So now we have it moving through. It offers a technical cleanup that allows the board to take action on non-certificated personnel that have been disciplined out of state as they move over to Arizona to teach. And it also offers that the board may take action on prospective employees rather than current employees, which would not grant the board any more authority than we already have, but it would move up the time window at which we can take action. There are cases where the investigative unit has eyes on an educator and knows that we are going to have to take action on this educator, but we have to wait until they are hired on in the process. So in those cases, they'll be hired on, may end up in front of students before the board can take action through no fault of the school, just by the way that the statute is written. They aren't aware of it. And then they're also, the schools are also spending resources and professional development on teachers that the board is aware will have to go through our PPAC process, and we are unable to take action until this point, just due to the without that cleanup. So it moved through third reading in the Senate, 28-0 with 2 not voting. It's a non-controversial bill. It's going to be in the House Education Committee tomorrow, actually, at 2 p.m. And then moving on to 2608. This bill requires the board to conduct an annual report on teacher retention and vacancies, and directs the board to work with the department to procure the data to fulfill the requirements. 1465, or actually, I'll start with SB 1654. This is a K through 12 omnibus bill. It reduces a lot of the administrative burden for schools, administrators, and also includes right now a removal of the summative letter grade, and prescribes that the board instead opts for the component scoring annual achievement profile. So the work that we're already doing with the ATACs on rolling out the component scoring will continue either way. This bill would remove the summative letter grade and favor the component scores for each category be drafted out and submitted for schools. 1465 is one of the board's legislative priorities. This bill makes the K-5 literacy endorsement voluntary. And as the board has taken action on early literacy in the past and made it a priority to uphold the early literacy rigor, this is something that I wanted to bring forward to board members. I also would like, Sean, if you would want to, this is kind of your space, if you wanted to provide a little bit of context about the K-5 space and early literacy.
Thanks, Rico. Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. So Senate Bill 1465, put forward by Senator Bennett, did make it out of Senate Ed Committee, and has not yet been heard by the House, right? And so what it would call for is 2 years ago, Senate Bill 1572 passed and required a K-5 early literacy endorsement for all K-5 teachers of reading. Teacher candidates in prep programs had to be trained by 2025. In-service teachers currently in the field by 2028. This bill 1465 would make the required endorsement optional. And so we have spoken on the bill at the behest of our legislative committee. I've testified on the bill, and we have been told that a stakeholder meeting will be scheduled with folks involved with the bill. So we're waiting on that stakeholder meeting. As of right now, the bill exists in its original form as it makes its way to the House.
Do board members have any questions, or would they like to open up any bills for discussion or action?
I would like to raise some questions and probably make a motion for action on SB 1465. This is the bill by Senator Bennett related to removing the K through 5 literacy endorsement requirement. Does anybody else have any questions? Because otherwise I have a few points to raise.
Are we just going to do bill by bill? Because I'm fine starting with that. Or we're only bringing up ones we want to kind of pull and talk about.
So Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Member Clark. So we can actually, whatever it is you all would prefer. If it sounds like Vice President Haley is going to want to focus on 1465 at the moment. If there's another bill that you have questions on, or that we would do that in secession, not necessarily voting on each bill unless the board decides. It also would be a time for questions, and yeah.
Okay. I think just a quick comment on SB 1465. Arizona, I would say, in many ways is a leader. Going back to 2011, we passed our Mauer legislation, our K through 3 literacy requirements, and it has taken us a while to implement it. And during the COVID pandemic, while many states saw a decline in their 4th grade reading on the nation's report card, also known as NAEP, we were one of a handful of states that actually stayed the same or made progress. And I just, I want to commend the Department of Education, the legislators several years ago that recognized that implementation is really critical when we pass a piece of legislation. Implementation, you just don't pass a bill and then everything happens. You have to work with key stakeholders to actually implement it. And I believe that the K through 5 literacy endorsement is a critical component of that. our literacy scores are still not awesome. And I would really like that to change. As many of you all know, both for just in general, when we look at students who are at risk for third grade reading, more times than not, those students, I believe it's 6 times likely not to graduate from high school. Students that struggling readers, when you look at those that do graduate or fail to earn a diploma, 80% of those students, 88% of those students struggled with reading. A couple other things, when we look at the exemplar states like Mississippi, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, where some of the greatest gains have been made, the K through 5 literacy endorsement and really that training on the science of reading has played a significant role in their success. I want our students to really thrive. And when we think about the future, whether it's our, Arizona, I think AZ60, or we look at a number of other benchmarks, our diverse student population, our increased number of students with, say, dyslexia, this type of training really, really benefits all of our students. And I would just like to say that I strongly oppose SB 1465, and I will be making a motion for the board to firmly come out against that bill. Any other comments?
Thank you, Vice President Haley. I would like to add, at the county level, this has been a movement. And the movement is a positive movement. We have cohorts of teachers now in our county. They're on the same page. They have the same point of reference. We have spent so much time, and it's not negative time, it's positive time, learning new ways to teach reading and working with each other. Even to the point, it has been hard because now teachers have to not only teach, but they have to learn something new. But just about every teacher that I've worked with and my county, we are actually leading the movement and helping with the training. And even when we can, give stipends to teachers. We've even gone that far as and every teacher that I've talked to has said this was worth it, even though it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to go through the training and continue with your job, but they all appreciate it. And I believe that we see the results. We're starting to see the results. We're starting to see the movement. And if we do something to stop the progress, what is that going to do? Is this decision going to make us better or make us, be in a standstill? So looking at the 5,000 foot view of this thing, it appears we're moving forward. Maybe not as fast as we want to, but there is movement and the teachers are embracing it. Thank you.
We'll go to Superintendent Horn.
Thank you. I passionately agree with the two comments that were just made. I think this would be a terrible step backwards. This is the problem, and I have a solution for it. The problem is that it's very expensive for teachers to take these courses. And so they've been complaining about the expense. So I've asked people in my department to develop a proposal where the department will provide the training for free. And that will solve the problem about the expense. There may need to be encouragement of the districts to pay for the extra time that the teachers have to spend doing it. That ultimately would be up to the districts, unless if, for example, a possible amendment to the bill would be to, we're developing a free course. There could be a bill requiring that, and requiring the districts to pay for the time the teachers have to take to do it. But I think to eliminate the requirement would be a terrible, terrible step backwards. We've got to improve our literacy. We have people arriving in high school now that they still can't read, even though they've been 6 years in elementary school, which to me is a scandal. So I urge either opposition to the bill or a proposal to amend the bill to require the department what we're going to do anyway, which is develop free coursework for the teachers.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. So we have been meeting with stakeholders, and many of the things Superintendent Horn has mentioned have been mentioned by stakeholders as well. Again, that formal stakeholder meeting hasn't yet happened, but we will absolutely bring those ideas forward. The board can support, oppose, remain neutral on a bill, and it doesn't close the door to further collaboration with sponsors. So, yeah.
All right, we've got several other questions. I'm going to go with Member Katniss, then Member Kravickas, and then Member Clark. We'll come back to Member Katniss and we'll go with Member Kravickas. Oh, there he is.
Come back to me after Member Kravickas.
Okay. Member Kravickas.
I just have one quick point. I completely agree with everything you've said. And I think what concerns me the most is one thing to pull back before implementation of something has begun, but we're already down the road. To Member Clay's point, we've already made on all the different policy components of pre-service and in-service, we've made such headway. To stop midway is hard for me to swallow. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Member Katniss, do you want me to go or have Member Clark go and then you come back? Okay, Member Clark.
Thank you, Vice President Haley. I echo the statements made by Vice President Haley and the other board members. I do not support the removal of the K-5 literacy endorsement. And I just wanted to add that in reviewing the bill positions, Senate Standing Committee details, the RTS positions, which are people who have signed in support of this bill, which would remove the K-5 literacy endorsement. I was personally very disappointed to see the Arizona Education Association signed in support of this bill to remove the K-5 literacy endorsement. And I was also disappointed to see, looks like Senator Gonzalez, Senator Marsh, Senator Miranda, and Senator Bennett also supported this bill, which would remove Arizona's K-5 literacy endorsement. So I personally do not support this bill.
Member Katniss.
Okay, now we're good. I was like, we're going in and out. So I think I'm really supportive of what this bill stands for, especially because early literacy is crucial. But I think where I'm having concerns, and I think that Superintendent Horny kind of addressed some of it, but right now it seems like it's an unfunded mandate where we got to figure out like who's paying for the training. We got to figure out who's paying for the endorsements, because so much of this, when we have these great ideas, it all falls on the teachers. It falls on, us figuring this out on our own time. And if we, have ADE that's paid for some of the trainings and supported some of the districts, which has been very, very helpful, but it hasn't been all of the districts yet. It hasn't been all of the classrooms, all the teachers. So I guess to mandate things with no financial support, I have trouble with. And I think it adds to concerns about why we have teachers leaving the classroom. And I think that the bill right now is being amended on, it's being worked on. So I'm just not sure why we would need to oppose it or support it or anything now until we kind of see what the amendments are. That's sort of where I'm coming from.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Member Katniss, the request to bring forward just the reminder that the board can vote on specific bills to support, oppose, or remain neutral is also just a function of timing. The February board meeting's today, the March meeting's not for another month. Between now and then, all bills will have moved. Crossover week is next week, or was last week. Bills move over to the other respective, the House to the Senate, Senate to the House. And so really it's a function of timing with the legislative session. Again, just to reiterate, we have been talking to stakeholders quite a bit. and working with stakeholders on what it is folks are looking for and whether those things can be added to the bill or found. And I do very, very much get the impression from Senator Bennett in our discussions with him that he's very amenable to hearing those concerns and working on the bill. So I do believe, though, that stakeholder meeting is coming and that work will be done. But I think the rationale when you're asking about kind of why vote now and however the board may vote, is also an issue of timing.
Any other questions or comments? Member Tovar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think another thing that is available tool for us is we express what major concerns we have about the bill and what we would want our executive director to move forward with, whether it's the funding component, I mean, you name it. I think that is at our discretion as well too. With my experience at the legislature, I know, if you're signed in support or against it, at times, and I'm not necessarily saying it happens all the time, but there was times where once a position was taken, it was a little bit more difficult to get into stakeholder meetings in regards to the position that, say, a group had taken. It did happen from time to time, and I wouldn't want that to happen in regards to the traction of collaboration that we're currently seeking right now. I myself, I want to learn more in regards to, the funding aspect, and hopefully that can come to fruition in making sure, as a former educator, when I taught first grade, I was fortunate enough to be at a district that did support financially in taking the early literacy endorsement, but it did take 9 months to achieve, and that was every weekend, time away from my family, and of course not getting paid for that. But I'll say, from what I learned in those 9 months was astronomical in regards to the difference that as a teacher it made for my students, especially in tutoring before and after school as well too. I did see just astronomical improvement from my students. So I'm very much in support of teachers getting the endorsement. I've been through it, I've done it. But again, the funding piece I think is absolutely critical. Thank you.
Any other discussion? I think perhaps on behalf of the board, I don't know if there's unanimity in looking at funding aspects, but I think that might be something for Executive Director Ross and Rico to look at when having these conversations with legislators about this particular bill. But I think there's unanimity and agreement that the K-5 literacy endorsement needs to prevail and should not be removed or made optional.
I'm not sure there's unanimity though, unless we vote on it, but
We still have to vote. Do you have a Dr. Hagerman?
Yeah, just a question, I guess, procedurally. Could we vote neutral with concerns and then have the following concerns and then potentially come back in March if those concerns aren't addressed? Is that a possible pathway forward?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Dr. Hagerman. Absolutely. Yeah, the board, this is the time where the board does charge board staff with the tactics to take or what approaches they would like. The legislative committee that meets every week also does that. So Dr. Core, Vice President Haley, Dr. Clay. So we follow the lead of our ledge committee as well. So there's a plethora of choices available. Again, oppose, support, neutral with concerns, neutral with supports. All of those pieces are available.
And maybe just also a question for clarification, a vote in opposition is just, we could also similarly vote those concerns or voice those concerns as well, Dr. Hagerman, to confirm, Sean, and then a vote in opposition would be to remove the endorsement specifically. It's not saying that we wouldn't want funding mechanisms to still be discussed.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Member Meyerson. So a vote to oppose would today would be a vote to oppose the bill in its current form, which calls for the K-5 endorsement to be optional. Doesn't include any of the suggestions that have been made, but it does not preclude board staff from participating in stakeholder meetings and calling for the things that the board members and legislative committee have called for, and it doesn't preclude the board in March if those changes have been made from changing its stance. And so that you have quite a bit of flexibility.
Yeah, because I think I heard the funding concerns, but that to the point of kind of collective agreement around what seems to, obviously we'd vote, but like what seems to be collective agreement about nobody wants to make it optional. We do want to ensure that it is funded. Just to confirm that that's what the vote would be.
So Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Member Meyerson, a vote today would be to oppose the bill in its current form. Yeah. And its current form makes the K-5 endorsement optional. But it doesn't, again, preclude any of that piece being done in stakeholder meetings and all of the things, which, again, any vote, whatever way the board decides to go, you all could absolutely still charge us to go into stakeholder meetings and put forward those same ideas.
I think what I'd like to do is make a motion to oppose Senate Bill 1465 in its current form.
Vice President Haley, my apologies. I think Member Katniss' hand was up.
Oh, sorry. Member Katniss. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice President Haley. It's hard to get people's attention being virtual. So I think going back to what Dr. Hagerman was saying, just because since the bill is currently being amended, I think that would maybe be a good decision for us to just be neutral with our concerns versus support or I guess oppose, just because I think that we have concerns, but I don't know if I necessarily know enough information to make a decision right now that's going to be like what exactly we want this to do, which is, help our early readers in their earliest forms, but also B, to make sure that we're not adding to our teachers' plates without proper, pay for their time. And I think those are things that are definitely concerns, but I think that we can kind of list our concerns into the amendable process.
Superintendent Horn.
I support the motion, and I want to assure Member Katniss that the Department of Education is working hard on a proposal to provide this training for free, which will eliminate the financial burden.
Thank you, Superintendent Horn.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Also, just to clarify, as part of the legislative process, conversations are ongoing, but changes have not been made to the verbiage of the bill just yet. So that's kind of, again, just to reiterate what Member Meyerson was saying, any motion put forward today would be a motion, again, be it support, oppose, neutral, would be about the bill in its current iteration.
Superintendent Horn, do you have another question?
No, I just forgot to click the handoff.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, then I will make a motion, and I'd like to make a motion to formally oppose Senate Bill 1465 in its current form. Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Clark seconds. We will do all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
No.
Vice President Haley, given that is not a unanimous vote, I think doing a roll call vote would be appropriate.
Sounds good.
So I'll go through. So Vice President Haley?
Aye.
Superintendent Horn?
Aye.
Member Katniss?
No.
Member Clark?
Aye.
Dr. Clay?
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman.
If it's okay, I'll explain my vote. So I'm going to vote no. My preference would be neutral with concerns, with the basis that in March, if the concerns haven't been met, we would move to reject at that point. So it's not, I think that we have to have this endorsement in place. So I'm completely in favor of that. I would just, from a process standpoint, I would prefer neutral with concerns and then come back in March and reject at that point if they haven't been addressed.
Member Meyerson? Dr. Robbins is not with us. Member Tovar?
Thank you. Will explain my vote in regards to my preference in voting neutral with concerns and continue collaborations with all stakeholders in the sponsor and co-sponsors of the bill. With that, I vote no for now.
So Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, we do not have a majority vote.
John, I think,
Member Kravickas,
I
I'm
don't
so
think
sorry.
I voted. Yeah,
I'm so sorry, Member Kravickas.
I know, but now I feel like I'm the deciding vote, and it is hard for me because I wholeheartedly and philosophically support the emotion. I just really want to support the process and Senator Bennett to kind of find a solution, but at this time I'll vote yes.
My apologies, Member Kravickas. I knew that my inability to read my own handwriting would come back to haunt me one day when I didn't become a doctor. Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, the motion passes by a vote of 6-3.
Thank you so much. Believe that there were other questions or concerns about other legislation that Rico presented today? Or Member Kravickas?
I just want to note, not necessarily to take a support, but something that we should maybe have on our list to keep an eye on is 1600. It's an issue that we've discussed a few times at the board, which would be to require school resource officers to receive training on how to work with students with disabilities. There's a floor amendment that will change it substantively. The goal's still the same, but I just would like it to be on our list to keep an eye out and hopefully support when the final version comes out of the Senate.
Yes, of course, Member Kravickas. We will keep eyes on that, and I will, in the next meeting, I will include it in our update materials. Thank you.
Any other questions about bills before the legislature? Member Clark.
Thank you. House Bill 2608. I'd like to take a look at that because it looks like it has pretty unanimous approval, and I'm wondering if it's something the board wants to lend its support for. But Rico might have more background.
Yes. So HB 2608 was introduced by Representative Gress. It is an annual report that the board would have to conduct on teacher recruitment and retention. Originally, as it stands right now, the board has signed in neutral, just in a way to provide context around the bill and the current process and data mechanisms that we have at our disposal between the board and the department, to provide context on how we would capture some of this data. And an amendment came to this bill that addressed some of the data limitations that the board had on vacancies. It requires, right now in its current form, requires school districts to submit on their annual financial reports current budgeted teachers by disaggregated categories. So that's an inclusion as it stands right now. And then the board, in our current thinking, we still would have to be workshopping this during the interim, but we would take the budgeted piece that's coming through from the districts and then cross-reference that with some other teacher databases that are available at the department to come out with what vacancies we have available or what vacancies we have in the field. And it also doesn't preclude the board from conducting surveys or finding other mechanisms to report on vacancy data as well.
To Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Member Clark, just to summarize, we've been working with Representative Gress kind of from day one at the department as well on the bill. So just as an update.
Yeah.
Dr. Hagerman?
I guess the only concerns I would have about it is just the logistical. What do you do with if you're at a rural district with a teacher that teaches multiple? Is there? It seems like it would be easy to have categories and things, but as you get into it, I'm worried. Like, how specific is the bill around the logistics of what exactly gets reported, and are there any concerns about the data sources and things like that? So that would be the only concern I would have with it. It would just be process stuff.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, as of right now, the disaggregated categories, I believe I will double check the language for you, but it includes grade level and subject area, and then total budgeted positions that they include in the budget. So that would be the three pieces that would be included. We would love to.
So I guess the question is, how do you report a teacher who teaches 2 sections of math, 3 sections of social studies, and does a PE class or something?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Dr. Hagerman, those are all the way the bill is currently written. It has some areas that it's calling for data from, but it leaves enough flexibility that in the implementation, the department and the board and could work with Representative Gress to build in there's so much nuance, folks on a 6/5 contract, those kinds of things. We would work, and have already actually started doing some work to address that.
Great. I think that the idea of the bill is great. It's just the logistics I was worried about.
Member Clark?
I'd like to make a motion, but I don't want to stop the conversation.
Do we have any other questions? Member Tovar?
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. In regards to the bill's current status, can you tell me the voting that has transpired to its current form?
Yes, Member Tovar. So the bill made it through third read in the House, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, and it received generally bipartisan support. There was also a floor amendment that was introduced and accepted by Representative Pollack on the floor that included some data requirements around teacher mentorship programs. And I think that made it more of a bipartisan piece of legislation because everybody wants to have access to this data. Same with the governor's report as well. I think that the concerns that staff has been, working through with the sponsor is just how to address some of the limitations that we currently have. And right now, it will also be heard in the Senate Education Committee this upcoming Wednesday.
Thank you for that, Rico. You kind of answered my second question, is just in regards to our current staff limitations and how that subject has been discussed with the sponsor and stakeholders. But if you want to add to it, I'm open to hearing.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Member Tovar, we, at the request of the JLBC, the board also submitted a fiscal note calling for the necessary funding to implement the bill. And we worked in conjunction with the department to build that estimate.
Thank you. Is there currently a fiscal amount attached to the bill?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, Member Tovar, there is the fiscal note, I believe, is $175,000, and that would go towards the hiring of a full-time employee, either by the board or the department, to oversee the gathering of the data and then the building of the mechanisms by which the data would be gathered, collected, analyzed, and then for upgrades to the department's teacher input application, TIA, which is a very vital input application that we use with the investigative unit, but is in need of some updates we got to change the gerbil out that's running on the wheel and pick some rubber bands. So it's we put in some requests for that as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Any other conversation or discussion or questions? Member Clark?
Let's see if I can get this motion right. So I move that the state board support House Bill 2608 on teacher retention.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Oh, 30 seconds. She
Okay.
moved.
So Dr. Clay seconds. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Great. Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments regarding the legislative presentation provided by Rico? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rico, for your presentation and updates, and Executive Director Ross for your additional information. Really appreciated the robust conversation today, and let us know if you need anything else. With that, I think we are moving on to number 6, the call to public. This is a time for the public to comment on items on today's consent portion of the enforcement actions. All speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. Director Ross, have we received any requests to speak?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. We have a pretty robust list of folks for this call to the public. So again, just as a reminder, the 2-minute time limit. In person, we have John Brigham, followed by Lisa Williams, and then Christo Visser.
Good morning, Arizona State Board of Education, Dr. Haley, Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, and all the people who are supporting me today in supporting the second chance. You're charged with supervising teacher certification and imposing discipline on those teachers who need it. I'm one of those. My dad taught me growing up, always usually when I didn't want to hear it, that discipline is a form of love. And so I really appreciate all that you do, all that you try to do, and especially all the difficult decisions that you have to make to enforce discipline, and sometimes maybe give some leniency to people where it's merited. When you read the factual summary in the report, I'm sure you were shocked, because I know I was, and I did those things, right? And I think it's important to note that, I was 45 years old when those things happened. It all took place over 7 months of time, and it was all while I was under the influence of drugs. I was addicted, and, it was the police. They didn't arrest me. They saved me. I mean, they saved my life. In the Arizona Department of Corrections, they corrected me. So, I'm extremely grateful for the discipline, because I have a second chance to be here in front of you today, and you have no idea how incredibly grateful I am to do that. While I was in jail, I was wearing the pink underwear and socks and eating slop with Sheriff Joe. My daughter tried to kill herself. She was so ashamed to have me as her father that she tried to take her life. And I made a solemn oath to God that if he would just save her, that I would never do drugs again, and that I would do everything in my power to help people with all kinds of challenges. And what better calling to help people than teaching? And, I wish Superintendent Horn was here, because I know he's been through a lot of cases and he knows BS a mile away. But, it's been almost 12 years. Am I done? Is that it? Is that it? Well, I've never done drugs since then. I'll never do them again as long as I live. And I I am uniquely qualified to reach the unreachable, the ones that aren't in your classroom. They can't read because they're not even going to school, right? How do you read them? You got to get them off the streets. And how do you talk? Necesitas hablar en español muchas veces. Tú podrías alcanzar muchas más personas en el mundo cuando tú podrías hablar su idioma. So I taught for 11 years at Chandler High School, an A+ certified school. I taught there for 8 years. I taught at North High School 3 miles from here as a crow flies. And at the end of the year, I got riffed because there were 4 students in my classroom out of 24.
Mr. Brigham.
Mr. Brigham.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You
my
guys are
apologies.
awesome, sincerely awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Lisa Williams, followed by Christo Visser, and then Kathy Visser.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Williams. I'm an educator myself, also a veteran. Been an educator for 20 years. I actually work with John. He worked for me inside of an Arizona State prison in a call center for 3 years. And I have to say, his efforts there were amazing. He actually started out just making calls for the company that had the call center there that I work for. He went on to mentor other people there, showed them things that they needed to know in order to be successful as well. He was literally my right hand. And I don't think some of the things and efforts I was able to do within that time frame with that group, I would have been able to do because he was extremely helpful. He was a leader, a trainer, a mentor. He was absolutely amazing. And to this day, I keep up with him just to make sure things are going great. And I am one of his biggest supporters. He is an amazing person. And I'm very particular about people that I hang with as being an educator. You know, there's a handful of ones that I stick with, and he's one of them. He's at the top of the list. So whatever it is he's trying to do or strive to, I would wholeheartedly recommend him for that. He is an absolute amazing human being. And he was an asset to me when he worked within the call center environment at Arizona State Prison. And I'm so happy that he's doing well and doing things that he's supposed to do. That's all I can say. I'm not sure what else to say, but he was unbelievable. And I pray that you allow him to go forward and continue to grow in what he's trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Christo Visser, followed by Kathy Visser, and then Kevin Gilligan. And board members, item 7C might, if you're looking for the item that folks have spoken to.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, your mission is to develop successful citizens through a robust public education. That's a big mission. That's a difficult mission, and you hold a difficult job today. Before me are doctorates, educators, professors, teachers, members of the public, serving us as the public, and I appreciate and value that. I'm here in support of John. You, as I, have had a collective lifetime of education experiences, not only in grade school and middle school and high school, but post-education. I'm sure as many of you have doctorates and other degrees and acronyms behind your names as I do, and as many I know. That's important to recognize that it took coaches, professors, and teachers, mentors, people who believed in us when we were young, who were there through the good, through the bad, through the difficult, who perhaps were consistent in showing up every day and providing us what we needed every day, because we may not have been getting it at home, or we may. Some of us have had amazing blessings in our life. Others have not. But nevertheless, it's always been steadfast in having wonderful mentors and teachers in our life, because we continue to pursue and seek those. I wouldn't have known that at a young age, but I learned that. And I can name a short list, well, short to me, probably less than 12, teachers in my life that have influenced and changed how I do and how I behave and how I show up. John represents one of those teachers. I see that in him. I've known John for a long time. I'm here to speak on his character, to reference. You don't know John like many behind me do. Clearly, a lot of us are here to support him. I appreciate your support and your vote in reinstating John's teaching certificate. Thank you.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Kathy Visser, followed by Kevin Gilligan, and then Andrew Brigham.
Good morning, President Haley, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board. My name is Kathy Visser. I'm here as a friend of John's, and I'm also a certified teacher in Arizona. I understand the grave importance of supporting this process and making sure we have qualified people in the classroom and people that should be influencing our children. I'm here in support of John and his teaching certification being returned. I've had the pleasure of having John work with my two children as an English tutor and a sporting coach for basketball and volleyball. Each of my children has learning challenges that require extra supports to ensure their success. John regularly comes to our home to read everything from Shakespeare biographies to Louis Zamperini, Shakespeare to Louis Zamperini biographies. Often while listening to them, I learn a lot from what he's teaching my children, and he has a way of incorporating, just really digging into the literature in ways that my son in particular struggles with making connections. John is a gifted and talented teacher who has a gentle way of breaking down learning challenges into manageable chunks, focusing on a child's strengths and using humor to help the child develop grit and to overcome challenges. John spent many hours reading and coaching my son in basketball. My son struggles with the alphabet soup of learning challenges, auditory processing, severe dyslexia, visual impairment, autism, CP, fine motor, and executive functioning challenges. With John's help, Jordan was able to participate on a high school varsity basketball team with his peers. John was able to focus on accommodations and skills to allow Jordan's success on the court. John spent hours working with the team outside of regular practice hours on improving their plays, as well as understanding Jordan's strengths and how to work with him in the plays on the court. My son also attends a micro school for disabilities. We have a large property, an edible garden, and 9 horses to care for, which take a lot of extra volunteer hours. And often when I go to volunteer over there, I found John's beat me over there and gotten a lot of things done for the school on his own time with as regards to the property. He's truly been a blessing to our family and the community. And often our greatest strengths come from how we manage the situations that come from our lowest moments.
Thank you
John
very
has an
much.
amazing outlook on life, and positivity is contagious. He knows what's truly important
Ms.
and
Visser,
has
thank you
much to
so
offer.
much.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Kevin Gilligan, followed by Andrew Brigham, and then David Brigham.
Morning, well, good afternoon now. Just want to say, God bless John Brigham. God bless everybody in this room. My name is Kevin Gilligan. I'm a retired Brooklyn North police officer. And I wrote some notes here. When I was told about this opportunity by John, I just said where and when. John Brigham is committed to being a teacher and a coach. As a cop, we look at life as the proverbial potholes and mirrors. We all get up in the morning and look in the mirror, and we've all hit those potholes in the road. Those little ones, the mediocre ones, and the ones you look at, say, where'd they go? That kind of we're all dealing with stuff like that. This is really about all of us. Get this thing to come back here. I met John in the gym. My son is in the 82nd Airborne. I've had the opportunity to learn about everything John stands for, the legacy of my son's alma mater. If you don't know about that history, you should learn about John, the Brigham family's legacy at Norwich. He's had the opportunity to consult with my son and the fluidity of the things he's dealing with in Fort Bragg right now.
three words that three definitions that I'd like to just recite here. Accountability, the fact or condition of being accountable, responsible. Resilience, the capacity to withstand, to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness. And perseverance, continued effort to achieve something despite difficulties, failures, or oppositions, the actions and conditions of instances of persevering. We all have to look at ourselves, and we've all had our potholes. This isn't really about John, this is about all of us. He deserves a chance. Thank you.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Andrew Brigham, followed by David Brigham, and then Robert Shigog.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Brigham, and I'm John's brother. Again, when he asked me, like everybody else, I jumped at the opportunity to speak. I think I've got one of the more unique perspectives as his youngest sibling. So he's about 12 to 13 years older than me, and other than about 12 months of his life, or 7 or 8 months, whatever it was, of my 44 years, he's been one of my greatest mentors and has always been there for me, whether I've asked for his help or not. He was always positively coaching me throughout my life, whether it was teaching me drills on the wrestling mat at 5 years old, spending additional time training after Pop Warner practices, spending hours training me the weeks leading up to the first season of varsity football, or coaching me on the ins and outs of real estate when I started my own career at CBRE, which is a competing company of Coldwell Banker where he was working. As mentioned before, all for about a year of my life, John's been a model citizen and one of my biggest role models. When he was walking the wrong path, it was incredibly obvious because it was the polar opposite of the man that he typically is, and his fall from grace was very swift. Once the fog of addiction cleared, a few weeks after the events 12 years ago, he righted the ship and hasn't wavered one iota. I think I was one of the tougher ones on John, as I had young kids, and during that time I would not let him near my house, near my kids, anything like that. And now he's my first call if I'm in a pinch or if I need someone to watch my kids. So John obviously made some mistakes, but he would be successful with a second chance as he's been in his life. He's a college graduate who is in Norwich University's Hall of Fame and obtained his master's degree. He was tremendously successful in real estate, and in the words of Chandler Unified School District Director of Community Relations, he was a beloved teacher, and that was after the incidents 12 years ago. I also saw that the principal of Chandler High School also wrote a letter in his support. John's desire to get his ability to teach and coach again comes from a place of love and a desire to help people. John will be fine with whatever's decided today, but it would be a shame that in a time where Arizona's youth needs positive mentors more than ever, to be without someone with the character of John Brigham. Thank you for your time.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, actually, I'm going to change the order because we have one more in person and then somebody changed to virtual. So we're going to go with Robert Shigog next, and then David Brigham, and then Nick Kahagis. So Robert, if you're with us.
Thank you, the board, for giving me this opportunity to speak. All of us have had teachers and coaches in our lives that made a significant impact on how we lived. John Brigham is one of those teachers. I've known him since 1975. We worked 1995, pardon me. And we worked together at North High School as teachers and coaches. We would meet at lunchtime to talk about each and every one of the wrestlers on our team and what was the plan for success. We didn't have enough time at lunchtime, so we ended up meeting at his home, and we were really guardians of those kids that were our wards on the wrestling team. When John went inside the prison, I stayed in contact with him with monthly letters. We talked about his plan for success. He also taught in the prisons and taught the non-English speakers. And then he learned Spanish himself and is now fluent in the subject. When we were at North High School, He would teach and sometimes dress in the theme of what they were talking about, what was being taught in the class. He was involved with the mentor program on campus. He was involved with the Shakespeare Festival, and he really went above and beyond. And that's why I have stayed in contact with him almost 30 years. I feel that because he went down the wrong road, that he is uniquely qualified to help students who are headed down that road. Students, when you see the students with the student violence going on and teen gangs, you need to have someone who's been down that road. And John is that person. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have David Brigham joining us virtually, followed by Nick Cahagas joining us virtually, and then Savannah Wright joining us virtually.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Good morning, Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, the board. My name is Dave Brigham. I'm John's older brother. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. John has been in my life since I was 2 years old. We lived in the same room together, sometimes in the same bed. We grew up together. We became the men we are today together. I spent most of my life in the Army as a Special Forces officer. I retired as a Brigadier General in 2020. I say this only to demonstrate that I have worked with thousands of this nation's finest young men and women, and that my brother John remains among the finest people I know. From 1967 until when John came into my life until June 2012, John lived an extraordinary and honorable life. He was a two-time All-American wrestler, the captain of his college football and wrestling teams. And he joins his father, now I'm going to cry, Andrew, and myself in the Norwich University Hall of Fame. He was a wonderful and beloved high school teacher and coach, the period of his life when he was the happiest. He was the leading salesman with Caldwell Banker for years. He was a wonderful husband, father, son, friend, and brother. And then came that period of his life from late 2011 until June 29, 2012, when a series of poor decisions resulted in drug abuse and addiction that changed the course of his life and the lives of everyone in this room. Decisions that he has paid dearly for. He lost his family, his profession, an extraordinary reputation, and his freedom for almost 8 years. There's no excuse for what happened, and he has never tried to make one. He accepted responsibility and spent each day since atoning for those mistakes and to regain his honor and return to his life of service and that of teaching. From that day in 2012, almost 12 years ago, he returned to his calling, that of being a teacher. He learned to read, write, and speak Spanish, a language he now speaks fluently. He prepared the Hispanic inmates for their GED by teaching them math, science, history, and how to read and write. He received his associate's degree in substance abuse, which he used to teach and mentor the other inmates. There is not a person that truly knows John, from the prison guard, the inmates, his family, his daughter, his friends, his students, his God, and hopefully the board that sits here today, that wouldn't testify to the transformation, indeed the redemption of John Brigham. He used a very dark time as a period of growth and rebirth and returned to the great man that he has always been, a man and teacher of love, passion, and humility, qualities our students desperately need today. I stand before you today, a proud brother and friend, to state unequivocally, I can't imagine a better man or better example to teach our nation's youth about life, love, service, and humility.
Thank you, Mr. Brigham.
Outcome.
Mr. Brigham, we do have to move to the next speaker. Thank you.
I love you, John Brigham. I'm proud of you.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Nick Cahagias. Sorry if I said that incorrectly. Followed by Savannah Wright.
Executive Director Ross, Nick is not online right now.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Savannah Wright from Richards and Moskowitz, who represents the state in this case.
Good afternoon, Savannah Wright, Counsel for the State Board of Education versus Brigham. Thank you, Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board. This is an application for certification in front of you, but we are here to speak about the Arizona Administrative Code R7-2-1307A. But in pertinent part, we're looking at the words of the Arizona Administrative Code. The board shall revoke or not issue the certification of a person who has been convicted of committing a list of criminal offenses, of which includes aggravated assault, and that's in subpart 11. The code clearly states that the board shall not issue certification of a person who has been convicted of aggravated assault. And in Mr. Brigham's application for certification that he submitted in December of 2023, he explains through his explanation of incident forms his prior arrest history, one involving the July 2012 arrest for robbery, theft by means of transportation, aggravated assault, and 3 counts of endangerment. And then in July of 2013, he pled guilty to robbery, felony aggravated assault, and 3 counts of endangerment. And so he was arrested for aggravated assault in 2012, pled guilty, and was convicted of felony aggravated assault in 2013, which falls squarely within the Arizona Administrative Code, section R7-2-1307A jurisdiction. And this arrest triggered the express terms of 1307A11, which requires that he be convicted of committing aggravated assault, as it's quoted in the administrative code. And so the board has no legal authority or jurisdiction here to issue a certificate under the Arizona Administrative Code, section R7-2-1307A, for a person who's convicted of aggravated assault. So therefore, following the Arizona Administrative Code law, the board is bound by and shall not issue certification to a person who has been convicted of aggravated assault under subpart 11. And his application should be denied today by the board. However, Mr. Brigham does have due process rights and has those rights to request a PPAC hearing today after the board's action. Thank you very much.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, that concludes this call to the public.
Great. Thank you so much. Now moving on to item number 7. This is the consent agenda for enforcement actions. The consent agenda for enforcement actions will be taken in a single motion. Do I have a motion to approve items 7A1 through 7A15, 7B1, 7B2, and 7C1?
So moved.
Dr. Hagerman makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Kravickas seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The next item is call to the public. This is a time for the public to comment on items on the general session portion of the enforcement actions. All speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. Director Ross, have we received any requests to speak?
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, we have 2 requests. First up virtually is Morgan Bigelow from Lubin and Enoch.
He's connecting now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Morgan Bigelow with the law firm of Lubin and Enoch. I represent Joshua Dockel. I am present if the board has any questions, but otherwise I have no further comments.
Thank you, Ms. Bigelow. Up next, Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Kelly Kozad, who is with us virtually.
Do we have Kelly with us?
Yes, she is connecting right now.
Okay, great. And for 2 minutes? Has Kelly been able to join us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can I begin?
Please do.
Yes, please do.
Okay. Superintendent Horn, members of the board. In mounting a defense before PPAC, I had hoped to avoid the inappropriate misuse of "but my mental health" or peer pressure as a catch-all excuse for my behavior. I wholly believe that it is and was my responsibility to maintain good mental health. This includes maintaining and standing firm on appropriate boundaries in relationships. Clearly, I failed myself, as it is my understanding based on comments from PPAC that they felt I was leaning too heavily into these factors rather than accepting responsibility for my behavior. I want the board to know that I 100% believe that no matter my mental health, that without my willingness to participate and move forward with the scheme, the criminal activity against my employer could not have occurred. I acted as the catalyst. I also want the board to know that I have been in mental health recovery successfully for over 9 years. I see a therapist once a month. I speak with other mental health professionals regularly and attend group meetings and maintain medication compliance. In the beginning, this treatment was court ordered. However, I continue the treatment now because my life is immeasurably better with it than it was before. It is because of cognitive behavior therapy that I'm able to hold myself accountable for thoughts and actions every day as I live my life, as well as for the mistakes that I've made in the past. I've gotten to the root cause of the mechanisms that led to my breakdown and subsequent criminal behavior. Those issues have been addressed and proper solutions and new thought patterns have been created to prevent a repeat occurrence. I would also like the board to consider the following pertinent facts when coming to their decision. First, my judgment of guilt was set aside November 2022, and all of my civil rights were fully restored at that time. Also relevant is currently I have a motion filed with the Superior Court of Maricopa County requesting a certificate of second chance, which I am now 100% statutorily qualified to be issued under ARS 13-905. It is my hope that with this additional information, the board will reconsider PPAC's conclusions and move favorably on my request for substitute teacher certification and disregard PPAC's recommendation to deny said certification. I thank the board for its time and consideration on this matter.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Vice President Haley, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. That concludes this call to the public.
Great. Thank you so much, Executive Director Ross. I'd like to take item 9A in a single motion. This is 9A, 1 through 9. Do I have a motion to approve item 9A1 through 9A9?
So moved.
Dr. Hagerman makes a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Member Tovar seconds. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 9B. I would like to take these items in a single motion. As always, board members may call for the removal of an item to be discussed and voted upon separately if they so choose. Do I have a motion to approve items 9B1 through 9B5?
So moved.
Dr. Clay makes a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Dr. Hagerman seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. And I believe that's it. All right, we've moved it to number 10. Summary of current events. Executive Director Ross.
Board members, thank you so much for a very productive meeting. Our next meeting is March 25th at 9 a.m. in this same room. As a reminder, I think the evils of daylight savings time kick in at some point between now and then. I always forget, but I'm pretty sure. So just make sure to update your calendars. And yeah, they have a great rest of the day, great weekend, and thank you so much for a very productive meeting.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your patience and for your contribution. And today's meeting adjourns at 12:56 p.m.